Tonight we walk through a quiet grove of mulberry trees, the leaves shimmering silver green in the late afternoon light of ancient China. You're following a narrow path worn smooth by generations of feet, and ahead, just visible through the branches, rises a long wooden structure with a gently curving tile roof. This is no temple, no noble's villa, this is a warehouse. But not just any warehouse. Behind those heavy timber doors lies the accumulated wealth of an empire, stacked in bales that smell of cedar and dust and something else, something almost alive, silk. You probably won't survive this. Not because the warehouse is dangerous, but because you're about to discover just how much meticulous record-keeping one civilization can inflict upon the world, and your soul may simply decide it's had enough. The Han Dynasty bureaucrats who designed this system didn't just count things, they invented new ways to count things, then counted those methods, then wrote poems about the counting. And you, lucky traveler that you are about to step into their world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The path widens as you approach the warehouse compound, and you notice details you might have missed from a distance. The wooden pillars supporting the eaves are set on stone plinths, raised slightly above the packed earth. A deliberate choice, you'll learn, to slow the rot that creeps upward from damp ground. The roof tiles curve in gentle waves, each one fired in a kiln somewhere nearby, each one stamped with the mark of its maker. Should one crack and leak, the overseer knows exactly which potter to summon for a pointed conversation about quality control. You pause at the threshold. The doors stand slightly ajar, and from within comes the soft murmur of voices, the occasional scrape of something being dragged across a wooden floor, and always, underneath it all, the rustle of silk. It's a sound like wind through dry leaves, but softer, more intimate. You push the door open and step inside. The first thing that hits you is the coolness. Outside, the Han Dynasty sun beats down with that particular intensity of northern China in summer. But here, beneath the thick roof tiles and among the dense stacks of goods, the temperature drops by several degrees. The second thing is the smell. Cedar, yes, and the earthy scent of aging wood, but also something sharper, more herbal. Wormwood, you'll later learn, tucked between bales to discourage insects. And over everything, that faint, almost imperceptible sweetness of raw silk itself, a scent you can't quite name but will never forget. Your eyes adjust slowly. The warehouse stretches before you in long aisles, wooden racks rising on either side to heights that disappear into the gloom above. Each rack is divided into compartments, and each compartment holds bales wrapped in coarse cloth, tied with hemp cord, and labeled with wooden tags inscribed in characters you can't read. The scale of it makes you catch your breath. You've seen granaries before, filled with millet and wheat, but those were utilitarian spaces, functional and plain. This feels different. This feels like a library, but instead of books, it holds the woven dreams of thousands of silkworms. A man passes you, barely glancing up. He carries a wooden board covered with notched sticks and a brush tucked behind his ear. A scribe, you realize, one of the countless bureaucrats who keep the empire running. His robe is plain but clean, his movements efficient, almost mechanical. He stops at a rack, pulls down a bale, checks its tag against something on his board, makes a notation, and replaces it. The whole sequence takes perhaps 30 seconds, and you wonder how many times he's performed this exact motion today. How many times this month? This year? The warehouse is quiet, but it's not silent. From somewhere deeper in the building comes the rhythmic click of an abacus, wooden beads sliding along bamboo rods in a pattern that sounds almost musical. Another voice calls out numbers. Inventory, probably, a count of something being moved or received. You catch fragments, 37 bolts of plain weave, 22 of damask. The words drift past like leaves on a slow current. You walk further in. your footsteps muffled by the wooden floor. The aisles form a kind of labyrinth, deliberately arranged, you suspect, to maximize space while keeping order. Each section is labeled with painted characters on wooden plaques: Eastern Wei Commandery, Langi Commandery, Taiyuan Commandery. These are the places the silk came from, administrative districts of the Han Empire, each with its own reputation for quality, its own local weavers, its own silkworms with their own opinions about mulberry leaves. You stop before a section labeled Shu Commandery and reach out to touch one of the bales. The outer wrapping is coarse hemp, practical and protective, but through a gap you can glimpse what lies beneath, a tightly rolled bolt of silk, its surface so smooth it seems to glow even in this dim light. The color is a deep, rich brown, the natural color of undyed silk, you realize, though your mind had always pictured it white or gold. In the Han Dynasty, most silk was left in its natural shades, cream and tan and warm brown, sometimes woven with patterns in contrasting colors but rarely dyed the brilliant hues you associate with later periods. That knowledge lands softly in your mind, a small adjustment to everything you thought you knew. A beam of late afternoon light slants through a high window, catching motes of dust that drift lazily through the air. For a moment, the whole warehouse seems suspended in amber, every bale and every tag and every carefully recorded number glowing with the warmth of a dying sun. You stand there, in the cool silence, surrounded by the wealth of an empire, and you realize the journey has only just begun. You breathe in the mingled air again, letting it settle deep in your lungs, and this time you can pick apart the individual threads of scent more clearly. The cedar is strongest, rising from the very timbers of the warehouse itself, chosen precisely because its aromatic oils repel the insects that would otherwise turn these priceless silks into a feast. But beneath it, there's the earthiness of the packed clay floor, swept clean but still retaining the memory of rain and soil. And always, that faint sweetness of silk, subtle as a whisper, easy to miss if you aren't paying attention. You step further into the aisle, and your sandals make soft scuffing sounds on the wooden planks laid over the earth. The warehouse wasn't built in a day, you realize. These planks show years of wear, their surfaces worn smooth in paths where feet have walked most often, slightly rougher in the spaces between. You're walking the same routes that hundreds of warehouse workers have walked before you, their absent presence still marked in the grain of the wood. A voice pulls you from your reverie. New inspector. The man who approaches is older, his beard streaked with grey, his robe slightly finer than the scribes you passed earlier. He carries himself with the quiet authority of someone who has spent decades in this building and knows every bolt, every tag, every shadow. Before you can answer, he waves a hand. Doesn't matter. Everyone's new once. Come, I'll show you how we keep the Emperor's silk from becoming moth food. He doesn't wait for a response, just turns and walks deeper into the warehouse, and you find yourself following. His name, you learn as he talks over his shoulder, is Magistrate Liu, though he hasn't been a magistrate for 20 years. They keep me on because I remember where things are, he says. The young ones, they can read the tags, but they don't remember that the tags from Jiangju Commandery used to be written in a slightly different hand, and if you don't know that, you might mistake a tribute bolt for a commercial one and throw off the whole year's accounts. He chuckles, a dry sound like rustling bamboo. They tried to retire me 3 times. I'm still here. You pass through an area where workers are unpacking fresh deliveries, their movements efficient and practiced. A bale is lowered from a cart, its outer wrapping slit open with a curved knife, and suddenly the silk within is exposed to the air for the first time since it left the loom. The worker who opened it runs experienced hands over the surface, feeling for irregularities, checking the weave against some internal standard only he fully understands. He nods, satisfied, and another worker begins the process of recording its arrival. Dimensions, weight, quality grade, estimated value, all scratched onto a narrow wooden slip with a brush so fine it seems to hold barely any ink at all. Magistrate Liu notices your attention. That's the first test. he says. Every bolt that enters this warehouse is examined by 3 different people before it's accepted. The weigher, the weaver inspector, and the scribe. If any one of them has doubts, the bolt gets set aside for review. If 2 have doubts, it's rejected outright and sent back to the commandery it came from, at their expense. He smiles thinly. You'd be surprised how quickly quality improves when local officials have to pay for shipping rejected goods back home. You watch as the approved bolt is wrapped again, this time in a fresh protective covering, and a new tag is attached. The old tag, you notice, isn't discarded, it's tied to the new one, creating a chain of custody that will follow this silk from this moment until it leaves the warehouse for whatever destination awaits it. Every hand that touches it, every eye that examines it, every brush that records it, leaves its mark in that growing cluster of wooden tags. The scale of the record keeping begins to dawn on you. This isn't just inventory management, this is an obsession, a religion of documentation that would make modern accountants weep with admiration. Every bolt has a story, and the Han bureaucracy is determined to write that story down, in duplicate, with copies sent to at least 3 different government offices in case one building burns down or gets invaded by nomads or simply has a particularly hungry family of rats. You ask Magistrate Liu how many bolts are in the warehouse at any given time. He considers the question, his eyes drifting up toward the shadowy rafters as if he can see through them to some mental ledger. At present, he says finally, roughly 47,000. But that's just the silk. We also store lacquerware, bronze mirrors, hemp cloth, and various other goods that the Empire sees fit to keep under imperial lock and key. He gestures vaguely toward a distant corner of the building. The lacquer alone requires its own section, with different conditions. Too dry and it cracks, too damp and it mildews. But that's someone else's problem. I stick to silk. 4 to 7,000 bolts. You try to imagine that many individual pieces of fabric, each one requiring its own tags, its own inspections, its own place in the endless ledgers that line the walls of the scribe's office. The numbers become abstract, impossible to hold in your mind, like trying to count the stars. And yet somewhere in this building, there are men who know exactly how many bolts there are, not just in total but by commandery, by quality grade, by estimated value in coin or grain or labor. They know which batches are aging well and which need to be moved soon. They know which commanderies consistently send their best work and which try to slip inferior silk past the inspectors. You pass a rack where the tags are noticeably older, their wooden surfaces darkened with age, the characters slightly faded. Magistrate Liu notices your glance. That's the reserve, he says. Silk that's been here 5 years or more. The Emperor likes to know that if a frontier garrison needs new banners or a foreign embassy requires gifts, we have stock ready. Some of that silk has been waiting longer than the men who wove it have been alive. He reaches out and touches one of the aged tags almost tenderly. They don't make it like this anymore, you know. The old weavers, the ones who learned from their mothers who learned from theirs, they're dying out. The new silk is good, but it's different. Thinner, somehow. More efficient, they tell me. I tell them efficiency doesn't keep a barbarian chieftain from noticing your gift feels cheap. The afternoon light continues its slow crawl across the warehouse floor, and you realize you've been inside longer than you thought. The shadows are lengthening, the air growing cooler still. Magistrate Liu glances toward a high window and nods to himself. Nearly time for the evening count, he says. You can stay and watch, if you like. It's not exciting, mostly just men walking up and down aisles with boards, but it's the heart of everything we do here. Without the count, we're just storing cloth. With it, we're managing the empire. He leaves you with that thought, disappearing down an aisle toward whatever duties await him. You stand alone in the quiet warehouse, surrounded by 4 to 7,000 stories waiting to be told, and you wonder how many of them you'll have time to learn before the night is through. You turn down a narrower aisle, one that seems to lead toward the very heart of the warehouse, and suddenly the space opens up around you. This is no ordinary storage rack. This is a silk bale mountain, rising in tiers that reach toward the ceiling like the steps of some enormous ziggurat dedicated to the gods of commerce and bureaucracy. Each tier holds row after row of bales, their wrapped forms creating a patchwork of coarse hemp and knotted cord, and the sheer mass of it makes you stop in your tracks. You run your hand along the nearest bale at waist height, your fingers tracing the curve of its shape. The hemp covering is rough, almost abrasive, a deliberate choice to protect the delicate silk within from anything that might snag or tear. But beneath that practical exterior, lies something entirely different. Yards and yards of fabric so fine that in later centuries, Roman senators would pay its weight in gold, would complain that their entire empire was bleeding wealth eastward just to clothe their wives in this impossible substance. The bale shifts slightly under your touch, and you realize with a start that these aren't static objects. They're alive in their own way, responding to changes in temperature and humidity, settling and breathing as the days pass. The silk within expands and contracts with the air, and the ropes that hold each bale together have been tensioned just enough to accommodate this slow, silent movement without crushing the fabric or allowing it to loosen dangerously. You notice that each bale has a small gap left between it and its neighbors, a finger's width of empty space that runs consistently throughout the stacks. Air circulation, you guess, allowing the precious contents to breathe and preventing moisture from becoming trapped against the wrappings. It's the kind of detail that only decades of experience would produce. Someone, somewhere, learned the hard way what happens when bales are packed too tightly, and now every warehouse in the empire follows the same rule. A young worker passes you, carrying a wooden pole with a hook on one end. He reaches up to a bale on the third tier, catches the rope that binds it, and gently tugs. The bale doesn't move. He adjusts his grip, tries again, and this time it slides forward just enough for him to check the tag attached to its underside. Satisfied, he pushes it back into place and moves on to the next. You watch him work his way down the aisle, methodical as a foraging ant, and you realize this is how the inventory is maintained, not through grand gestures, but through thousands of small, repetitive acts, each one contributing to the whole. Magistrate Liu's voice echoes from somewhere nearby. That boy's been here 3 months. Still learning the weight. You turn to find him leaning against a support pillar, watching the young worker with the same expression you've seen on farmers watching their fields. Pride mixed with the knowledge that things could go wrong at any moment. When you first start, every bale feels the same. After a while, you learn that the ones from Shu are slightly heavier, denser weave, more threads per inch. The ones from Qi feel lighter, but the silk itself is stronger, more flexible. You can tell where a bale came from just by how it sits on your hook. He pushes off from the pillar and walks toward you, gesturing at the mountain of silk. Each one of these is a message. Not just the tags, the bale itself. The size tells you how many bolts are inside. Standard bale holds 20, but sometimes you'll see a 30-bolt bale from a commandery that had a good year and wanted to show off. The way it's wrapped tells you who packed it. Some regions use 3 cords, some use 4, some use a particular knot that their local inspector favors. Even the color of the hemp means something. Darker hemp comes from the south, lighter from the north, and if you see a bale wrapped in mixed hemp, that means it was repacked here, probably because the original wrapping was damaged. You look at the bales with new eyes, seeing now what you missed before, the subtle variations, the coded language woven into every aspect of their construction. A 3-cord bale with dark hemp and a slightly larger than usual size. That's a message from the south, boasting of a bumper crop. A 4-cord bale in light hemp, wrapped so tightly the cord have left deep impressions. That's the north, efficient and no nonsense, sending exactly what's required and not an inch more. And there, in the corner, a bale wrapped in mixed hemp, its cords uneven, its shape slightly irregular. That's a story of failure and recovery, of something gone wrong and fixed well enough to pass inspection. Magistrate Liu follows your gaze. Ah, you spotted the orphan. He walks toward the irregular bale, and you follow. This one came in 6 months ago with a damaged wrapper. Rats got to it during transport, chewed through the hemp and got into 2 of the bolts before the guards noticed. The local inspector wanted to reject it entirely, but the commandery argued that the silk itself was undamaged, only the wrapper and 2 bolts needed replacing. So they sent new bolts, new wrapper, and we repacked it here. He runs his hand over the mixed hemp. Now every time someone sees this bale, they remember, rats nearly won. But the Empire didn't let them. You ask him what happens to the damaged bolts, the ones too far gone to save. He shrugs. Depends. Sometimes they're sold locally, at a discount, to anyone who doesn't mind a few small holes. Sometimes they're cut down into smaller pieces, handkerchiefs, pouch linings, things that don't need a full bolt's length. And sometimes, if the damage is really bad, they're burned. He says the last word flatly, without emotion. The emperor would rather destroy damaged silk than let inferior goods carry his name. Image matters. You see, a barbarian king receiving a gift with moth holes isn't just receiving damaged cloth, he's receiving an insult. Better to burn it and send nothing than to send something that says this is what we think of you. You think about that as you wander deeper into the Bale Mountain, the aisles curving and branching in ways that feel almost organic, as if the silk itself had dictated the layout. The stacks rise on either side, cutting off your view of anything but the immediate path, and for a moment you feel like Theseus in the labyrinth, except instead of a minotaur at the center, there's just more silk, more bales, more evidence of an empire's obsession with cloth. The silence here is different from the silence near the entrance. Back there, you could hear the distant sounds of workers and scribes, the ambient noise of a functioning warehouse. Here, deep in the stacks, the silk seems to absorb sound, drinking in echoes until all you can hear is your own breathing and the soft scuff of your sandals on wood. It's peaceful in a way that surprises you. Not the peace of emptiness, but the peace of order, of everything in its place, of 47,000 stories all stacked neatly and waiting to be read. You reach out and touch another bale, this one higher than you can comfortably reach, and you wonder who wove the silk inside. A woman, probably. Silk weaving was women's work in Han China, passed down from mother to daughter, the secrets of the loom guarded as carefully as any state secret. Did she know, as she worked the treadles and threw the shuttle, that her silk would end up here, in this cool dark place, waiting for an emperor's command? Did she care? Or was she simply doing what her mother did, and her grandmother before her, weaving silk because that's what women in her family had always done? The bale doesn't answer, of course. It just sits there, heavy with possibility, waiting for whatever comes next. And you, standing in its shadow, feel suddenly very small. Not insignificant, exactly, but aware of your place in something much larger than yourself. The Han Empire stretches from the desert wastes of Central Asia to the jungles of the south, from the Korean peninsula to the Tibetan plateau, and somewhere in all that vastness, women are weaving silk that will end up in this warehouse, will be counted and catalogued and stored against some future need. And you are here, in the middle of it all, running your hand over a bale and wondering about a woman you'll never meet. The light through the high windows has shifted again, growing warmer, more golden. Evening is approaching, and with it, the final count of the day. You turn and begin making your way back toward the front of the warehouse, the Bale Mountain slowly receding behind you, its secrets still mostly intact, its stories still mostly untold. You wander away from the main thoroughfare, drawn by the sheer verticality of the space. The racks rise above you like the shelves of some vast and silent library, each compartment holding its bundle of dreams. But ahead, the aisles open into something unexpected. A chamber where the racks give way to stacks so tall they seem to defy the building's roof. Here, the silk isn't stored on shelves but piled in bales that tower over you like haystacks in a harvest field, each one reaching toward the shadowed ceiling with a kind of quiet ambition. You've found the bulk storage, where the warehouse keeps its deepest reserves. These aren't the carefully organized bolts awaiting inspection or the premium goods set aside for imperial use. These are the mountains of raw inventory, the accumulated textile wealth of entire commanderies, stacked in formations that would make a military strategist nod in appreciation. The bales here are larger than the ones you've seen elsewhere, each one the size of a small cart, wrapped in multiple layers of protective cloth and lashed with hemp ropes that crisscross in intricate patterns. You step closer and lay your palm against the nearest bale. The surface is cool and slightly yielding, the silk within compressed by its own weight into a density that feels almost solid. Through the wrappings, you can sense the layers upon layers of fabric folded inside, thousands of yards of weaving compressed into this single monumental package. Somewhere in that bale, you realize, are the labors of entire villages. Women who spent their days at looms, children who fed mulberry leaves to silkworms, men who transported the finished bolts to collection points where they began their long journey to this warehouse. A worker approaches with a wooden mallet and a tapered rod, and you step back to watch. He selects a bale at random, not the one you touched, but one nearby, its wrappings marked with characters you're beginning to recognize as quality indicators, and begins a procedure that seems almost violent. He drives the tapered rod into the bale's side, twisting and pushing until it sinks deep into the compressed silk. Then he withdraws it, bringing with it a small sample of the fabric within, pulled from the very heart of the bale. He examines this sample carefully, holding it up to the light from a nearby oil lamp, running his fingers across its surface, even bringing it to his nose for a sniff. Satisfied, he makes a notation on his board and moves on to the next bale, leaving the sample tucked into the outer wrappings where it will serve as a visible record of what lies beneath. "That's the second test," says a voice behind you. You turn to find a younger man, perhaps 30, with the ink-stained fingers of a scribe and the alert expression of someone who notices everything. The first test happens when silk arrives. The second happens at random intervals, just to make sure nothing's changed. Mold can start inside a bale and spread for months before anyone sees it on the outside. Insects can tunnel in. Sometimes, he lowers his voice, sometimes dishonest weavers hide inferior silk in the middle of a bolt, with good quality on the ends where inspectors will see it. The core samples catch most of that. His name is Chen, and he's one of the senior scribe's assistants, which means he spends his days walking these aisles, checking, recording, verifying. He carries a wooden board of his own, thick with wooden slips, and a brush case hanging from his belt. Unlike Magistrate Liu, who seemed to belong to an earlier era, Chen moves through the warehouse with the easy confidence of someone who has mastered its systems and found them good. The bales are arranged by commandery and quality grade, he explains, gesturing along the rows. The best stuff goes closest to the inspection area, where we can keep an eye on it. The medium grades fill the middle racks. And this, he waves at the towering stacks around you. This is the common silk, the everyday fabric that will become soldiers' uniforms, government clerks' robes, packing materials for more valuable goods. It's still silk, still worth more than most people earn in a year, but it's not the kind of thing you'd send as a gift to a foreign king. You ask him how they keep track of which bale is which when they all look so similar from the outside. He smiles and points to the tags, which you've been ignoring in favor of the bales themselves. Each bale has not one tag but several, attached at different points and in different colors of cord. The red cord means it's been inspected at least twice, Chen says. Blue means it's scheduled for movement within the next month. Yellow means there's some question about it. Maybe the core sample showed something unusual, maybe the documentation from its home commandery had an error, maybe we're just waiting for a second opinion from a senior inspector. He touches a yellow corded tag almost apologetically. Some of these have been waiting for years. The questions never got answered, but no one wants to make a decision, so they just sit here, accumulating dust and yellow cords. You walk along the base of the bale mountain, running your hand along the coarse wrappings. The scale is overwhelming, not just the size of individual bales, but their number, stretching away into the dimness of the warehouse's deepest reaches. 47,000 bolts, Magistrate Liu had said, but that was bolts, not bales. Each bale contains dozens of bolts, sometimes hundreds. The true number of individual lengths of silk in this building is almost too large to contemplate. Chen follows your gaze. They say the first emperor tried to count all the silk in the empire once, he remarks. Sent out orders to every warehouse, every storehouse, every private collection. The reports took 3 years to come back, and by then, half the numbers had changed. They say he gave up and declared the count complete anyway, just to save face. He shakes his head. We're more realistic. We count what we can, when we can, and we accept that some things will always slip through. The trick is making sure the things that slip are the unimportant ones. You pause before a bale that seems older than the others, its wrappings darkened with time, its tags yellowed and brittle. The characters on the tags are in an older style, the brushstrokes broader and less refined than the elegant script on newer bales. Chen notices your interest and steps closer. That one's from the reign of Emperor Wen, he says quietly. 60 years ago, maybe more. It's been here so long that no one remembers exactly what's inside. The records say it's plain silk, medium grade, from Jinan Commandery, but the records from that period are incomplete, and some of the tags have fallen off and been reattached in the wrong places. He shrugs. We could open it and find out, but that would require moving it, and moving it would require documenting the move, and documenting the move would require finding the original records, and finding the original records would require... He stops, spreading his hands in a gesture of bureaucratic surrender. So it sits. Maybe next year someone will have time to deal with it. You look at the ancient bale, this monument to imperial inertia, and you think about all the hands that have passed by it over the decades. The workers who stacked it here, believing they'd move it soon. The inspectors who glanced at its tags and moved on. The scribes who noted its existence in ledgers and then forgot about it. The bale has outlived them all, outlasted emperors and dynasties and the very commandery that sent it, and still it waits, patient as stone, for someone to finally decide what to do with it. A bell rings somewhere in the distance, a soft bronze note that echoes through the warehouse. Chen glances up. Evening count, he says. I need to get to my station. Walk the aisles if you like, just don't touch anything with a yellow cord. Those ones are trouble. He gives you a quick nod and hurries away, his footsteps fading into the rustling silence. You stand alone at the foot of the Bale Mountain, surrounded by the accumulated textile wealth of an empire, and you realize that you've only begun to understand what this place truly is. It's not just a warehouse. It's a memory, a record, a living document of everything the Han Dynasty produces and consumes and values. And somewhere in its depths, among the bales and bolts and yellow-corded mysteries, the story of an entire civilization waits to be unrolled. You wander away from the Bale Mountain, your mind still turning over the image of that 60-year-old mystery waiting patiently for someone to care about it again. The evening bell has fallen silent, but its echo seems to linger in the air, a bronze hum that vibrates just at the edge of hearing. You follow a path that leads toward a better lit area, where oil lamps hang from hooks at regular intervals, their flames steady in the still air. This is the inspection station, and it's here that the warehouse's true work becomes visible. Long tables stretch across the space, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of silk sliding across them. Workers stand at each table, unrolling bolts with practiced motions, their hands moving over the fabric like water over stones. You step closer, drawn by the hypnotic rhythm of their movements, and you watch as a bolt of plain silk is spread across the table in a shimmering river of cream and brown. The worker who unrolled it doesn't look up. His attention is fixed on the fabric, his eyes moving slowly from one edge to the other, his fingers following just behind his gaze. He's looking for flaws, you realize, broken threads, uneven weave, spots where the color varies unexpectedly. Every few feet, he stops and makes a tiny mark on the silk with a piece of chalk, then continues his slow progress down the length of the bolt. Beside him, another worker holds a wooden rule against the fabric, measuring its width at regular intervals. Hand silk was supposed to be woven to precise specifications. A standard bolt was so many feet long and so many inches wide, with a thread count that fell within certain parameters. Any deviation could mean the difference between acceptance and rejection, between a bolt that would become an emperor's robe and one that would end up as packing material for something more valuable. You watch as the first worker reaches the end of the bolt and straightens up, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension of bending over the table for so long. He catches your eye and offers a tired smile. 372 today, he says, gesturing at the bolt. That's the number of feet in this one. Standard length should be 360. Someone's loom was set wrong, or someone was trying to cheat by making bolts longer than they should be. He shrugs. Extra length means extra weight, extra value. Send enough of these and you're effectively stealing from the emperor. He makes a notation on a wooden slip and sets it aside, then begins the process of refolding the bolt. You watch his hands work, creasing the fabric with mathematical precision, each fold exactly the same width as the last, until the long river of silk has become a neat rectangle once more. The chalk marks remain visible, tiny white specks against the cream-colored fabric, waiting for someone else to interpret them. You're wondering about the writing, says a voice, and you turn to find a woman standing nearby, her arms folded, her expression one of mild amusement. She's older than the workers at the tables, with grey streaking her hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of knowing exactly what she's doing. Everyone wonders about the writing. Come, I'll show you. She leads you to a smaller table set apart from the main inspection area, where a single bolt lies unrolled under the brightest lamp. This silk is different from the ones you've seen, finer, almost translucent, with a pattern woven into it that catches the light and seems to shift as you move. Damask, you realize, the kind of luxury fabric that only the wealthiest could afford, and even then only for special occasions. Read this, the woman says, pointing to a section of the fabric near one edge. You lean closer and see, woven directly into the silk, a series of characters, not printed or embroidered, but actually part of the weave itself, created by varying the pattern of threads as the fabric was made. The characters are elegant, formal, and entirely beyond your ability to decipher. The woman, her name, you learn, is Widow Zhong, and she's been inspecting silk since before most of the workers at the tables were born, traces the characters with one finger. This tells us who wove it, where it was woven, and when. It tells us the quality grade and the name of the inspector who approved it at its home commandery. It tells us, she pauses, squinting at a particularly dense cluster of characters, that this bolt was intended as a gift for the emperor's birthday in the third year of the Yuan Shou era, but it arrived late, so it ended up here instead. She smiles slightly. Someone's head probably rolled for that. Missing the emperor's birthday with a gift that was supposed to be there? That's the kind of mistake that ends careers. You look at the woven message with new respect. This isn't just fabric, it's a document, a permanent record that will survive as long as the silk itself. Unlike the wooden tags, which can fall off or be switched or fade beyond readability, this information is part of the bolt's very substance. Cut the silk, and you cut the message. Burn it, and the message dies with it. But as long as the fabric exists, so does the story woven into its threads. Widow Zhong notices your fascination and nods approvingly. The weavers who can do this are rare, she says. It's not just knowing how to write, it's knowing how to write in thread, how to make the characters readable without weakening the fabric or disrupting the pattern. Most weavers never learn. The ones who do are treated like the treasures they are. She runs her hand over the damask almost reverently. This one came from Shu, where they've been weaving patterned silk for longer than anyone can remember. The women there learn the characters from their mothers, and their mothers from theirs, passing down not just the skill but the exact forms, the proper strokes, so that an inspector in Chang'an can read a bolt from Shu and know it's genuine. She gestures for you to follow her to another table, where a bolt of simpler silk lies waiting. This one has no woven characters, only a series of marks made with ink on the fabric itself. Not all silk gets the full treatment, she explains. Plain silk for everyday use, soldiers' uniforms, clerks' robes, that sort of thing, gets stamped with a simple seal. The stamp tells us where it came from and when it was inspected, but it's not part of the weave, so it can fade or wash out. That's fine for common goods. It's only the premium stuff that gets the woven marks. She picks up a wooden seal from the table and shows it to you. A block of wood carved with reverse characters, the kind of tool that would be dipped in ink and pressed against fabric to leave its mark. Every commandery has its own seal, she says. Every inspector has his own chop. When you see a bolt with the right combination of stamps, you know it's passed through the proper hands, followed the proper channels, been approved by the proper authorities. She sets the seal down carefully. And if you see a bolt with the wrong stamps, or stamps in the wrong order, you know something's wrong. Maybe it's stolen. Maybe it's counterfeit. Maybe someone in the chain got lazy or greedy or just made a mistake. Either way, it's our job to catch it. You spend the next hour moving from table to table, watching the inspectors at work. Each one has their own specialty. Some focus on width and length, some on thread count and weave density, some on color and pattern, some on the all-important marks and stamps that tell the silk story. They work in near silence, communicating in brief murmurs or gestures, their movements so practiced they seem almost unconscious. A bolt is unrolled, inspected, marked, refolded, and set aside, all in the time it takes you to draw a few breaths. And through it all, the silk itself seems to watch, its subtle patterns and woven messages waiting patiently to be read by whoever comes next. You think about all the hands that have touched these bolts, the weavers who made them, the inspectors who approved them, the scribes who recorded them, the workers who stacked them. And now you, a visitor from nowhere, standing in the lamplight of a Han Dynasty warehouse, learning to read the secret language written in silk. The oil lamps have burned lower now, their flames shrinking to small blue hearts at the tips of wicks, and you realize the inspection station is gradually emptying. Workers gather their tools, roll their last bolts, exchange quiet words before disappearing into the deepening shadows of the warehouse. But one light remains bright, and you follow it to a small room tucked against the outer wall, the scribe's office, where the real work of the warehouse never truly ends. You pause at the threshold, not wanting to intrude. The room is crowded with wooden shelves, each one stacked to overflowing with narrow wooden slips bound together with cords. These are the ledgers, the daybooks, the permanent records of everything that has ever entered or left this building. There are so many of them that you can't see the walls behind the shelves, just wooden cord and the faint ghost of ink, layer upon layer of recorded time. At the center of this papery labyrinth sits a single figure, his brush moving steadily across a fresh wooden slip. He hasn't noticed you yet, or if he has, he's too absorbed in his work to acknowledge you. You watch as he dips his brush, touches it to the slip, and produces a line of characters with the kind of effortless precision that only decades of practice can bring. Each stroke is exactly where it should be, exactly as thick or thin as it needs to be, and the cumulative effect is almost musical, a visual rhythm that dances across the wood. This is Senior Scribe Wang, and if Magistrate Liu is the memory of the warehouse, Wang is its conscience. Every bolt that passes through these doors leaves its trace in his ledgers. Every inspection, every movement, every change in status is recorded in his careful hand. When questions arise, and they always do, It's Wang's records that provide the answers. When disputes between commanderies need resolution, it's Wang's numbers that settle them. When the imperial auditors arrive from Chang'an, it's Wang who sits with them, explaining the mysteries of this place in his calm, methodical voice. You clear your throat softly, and he looks up. For a moment, his eyes seem to focus on something far away. Then they snap back to the present and he offers a small bow of his head. Visitor, he says. It's not a question. You've come at a busy time. The monthly summary is due in 3 days, and I'm still reconciling the figures from last week's deliveries. He gestures at the stacks of slips around him. Somewhere in all this, a bolt from Langi Commandery is recorded as received but not yet inspected, and another bolt from the same commandery is recorded as inspected but not yet received. The numbers should match. They don't. So I sit here, night after night, looking for the error that will make everything right again. He returns to his writing, and you step closer, careful not to disturb the stacks. The slip he's working on is covered with characters arranged in neat columns, and you can see that it's a kind of ledger page, each line recording a single bolt. Its origin, its quality grade, its dimensions, its current location in the warehouse, its status in the endless cycle of inspection and storage and eventual dispersal. The sheer density of information makes your head spin. Wang pauses, sets down his brush, and rubs his eyes with the back of his hand. You want to know about the work, he says. Everyone does. They see the silk, they touch the silk, they think the silk is the important part. But without this, he taps the wooden slip, the silk is just cloth. With it, the silk is wealth, is power, is the difference between an empire that functions and an empire that falls apart. He reaches for a bound stack of slips and unties the cord that holds them together, spreading them across the table like a fan. Look here. This is the record for the 3rd month of last year. Every bolt that arrived, every bolt that left, every bolt that was moved from one section to another. 4 to 7 separate entries, each one checked and double-checked, each one signed by the inspector who handled the bolt and countersigned by the scribe who recorded it. He points to a series of small marks at the bottom of each slip. These are the signatures. See how they differ? That one is Inspector Ma. He always makes his mark a little too large, as if he's trying to claim more space than he deserves. That one is Assistant Scribe Liu. His marks are so small you need a magnifying glass to read them. And that 1 inch, he taps a particularly elegant signature. That one is mine. I've been making it the same way for 37 years. You ask him how many slips he's filled in that time, and he laughs, a dry, papery sound that fits the room perfectly. How many grains of millet in a granary? How many drops of water in the Yellow River? I stopped counting after the first 10 years, when I realized the numbers would just depress me. He gestures at the shelves. Every one of those stacks represents a year of my life. Some years were busier than others. Some years I barely left this room, just wrote and wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes blurred and my wife sent our son to drag me home for dinner. And still the silk kept coming, and still I kept writing. He picks up his brush again, but doesn't dip it in ink. Instead, he holds it like a kind of talisman, turning it over in his fingers. The hardest part isn't the writing. The hardest part is knowing that every slip I fill will outlive me. Long after I'm gone, long after everyone who ever knew my name has joined the ancestors, these records will still be here, still being consulted by scribes who never met me, still shaping the decisions of people who will never know that I existed. He sets the brush down carefully. There's a kind of immortality in that, I suppose. But it's a lonely one. You look at the shelves with new eyes, seeing them now not just as storage but as a kind of monument, a mausoleum built from wood and ink, housing the ghosts of every bolt that ever passed through this warehouse. Somewhere in those stacks is the record of that 60-year-old bale you saw earlier, its history preserved in Wang's predecessor's handwriting, waiting for someone to come along and read it. Somewhere is the record of the bolt you watched being inspected, its journey just beginning, its story still unwritten. Wang dips his brush at last and returns to his work, the scratch of bristles onward filling the small room like the breathing of some ancient creature. You watch for a while longer, mesmerized by the rhythm of it, the way each character flows from his brush as naturally as water flowing downstream. This is the heart of the warehouse, you realize. Not the silk, not the bales, not even the inspectors with their trained eyes and careful hands. The heart is here, in this crowded room, in the mind of this patient man who turns the chaos of thousands of individual bolts into the order of neat columns and balanced totals. A knock sounds at the door, and a younger scribe enters with a handful of fresh slips. He murmurs something to Wang, who nods and accepts the new records, adding them to the pile beside his elbow. The young scribe glances at you briefly, then withdraws, and the room returns to its quiet rhythm of scratch and pause, scratch and pause. Wang speaks without looking up. "You're still here." Most visitors get bored after a few minutes. They want to see the silk, touch the silk, imagine themselves wearing the silk. The records just seem like work to them. He pauses, his brush hovering over the slip. "But you're still here. That means something." You're not sure what it means, exactly, but you know you're not ready to leave. The scribe's office, for all its apparent mundanity, feels like the place where the warehouse's secrets are kept. Not hidden, exactly, but stored in a form that requires patience to unlock. And you have patience, or at least you're learning it, standing here in the lamplight while senior scribe Wang writes another line, another record, another small piece of immortality. A distant rumble pulls you from the scribe's office, a sound so low you feel it in your chest before your ears fully register it. Wang's brush pauses mid-stroke, and he looks up toward the ceiling with an expression you can't quite read. Resignation, maybe, or the weary acceptance of someone who has seen this before. The rumble comes again, closer this time, and now you recognize it. Thunder, rolling across the sky like stones tumbling down a mountainside. "Rain," Wang says flatly. "The roof will leak. It always leaks." He sets down his brush with exaggerated care and rises from his stool, his joints popping in protest. "Come. You should see this. It's not pretty, but it's part of the work." You follow him out of the office and into the main warehouse, where the change in atmosphere is immediately noticeable. The air has grown heavier, charged with the kind of static tension that precedes a storm, and the familiar scents of cedar and silk are now undercut by something else. The smell of wet earth, of rain hitting dry ground somewhere nearby. Through the high windows, you can see the sky darkening to a bruised purple, clouds boiling across the horizon like something alive. Workers are already moving, their earlier languor replaced by purposeful haste. You watch as they unroll lengths of oiled cloth and begin draping them over the most vulnerable stacks, the ones closest to known leaks or under sections of roof that have troubled them before. Others carry clay pots and wooden buckets, positioning them at intervals along the aisles in a pattern that clearly reflects hard-won experience. They know where the water will come, even before the first drop falls. Magistrate Liu appears at your elbow, his usual calm replaced by something sharper. "The spring rains," he says, as if that explains everything. "They're early this year. The roofers were supposed to finish the repairs last month, but there was a dispute over payment, and then the lumber delivery was delayed, and now," he gestures upward as the first fat drops begin to strike the roof tiles, a patter that quickly swells to a drumming roar. "Now we dance." You follow him and Wang to a section where the roof has already begun to betray them. A steady drip has become a trickle, and a trickle is rapidly becoming a stream, water coursing down a support pillar and spreading across the floor in a widening pool. Workers have surrounded the area, frantically moving bales away from the growing danger, their movements careful despite the urgency. No one wants to drop a bale, to damage the very silk they're trying to protect. You step forward without thinking. your hands reaching for the nearest bale. It's heavier than you expected, dense with compressed fabric, and you grunt with effort as you lift it clear of the spreading water. A worker nods thanks and takes it from you, stacking it with others already rescued. You reach for another, and another, your muscles burning, your breath coming short, until the immediate area is clear and you can straighten up and assess the damage. The pool on the floor has grown, but it's contained now, the leaking roof above temporarily soothed by some adjustment a worker made with a long pole and a patch of oiled cloth. Water still drips, but into buckets rather than onto silk, and the crisis has passed, for this spot, at least. Elsewhere in the warehouse, you can hear the same drama playing out, the same frantic movement, the same narrow escapes. Magistrate Liu appears beside you again, this time holding a piece of cloth that he offers for you to wipe your hands. You did well, he says. Most visitors freeze when the rain comes. They stand and watch, or they run for cover, or they ask useless questions about why the roof wasn't fixed properly. He shakes his head. You helped. That counts for something. You ask him how often this happens, and he laughs without humor. Every rain. Every single rain. The roof is old, the tiles are old, the beams are old, everything about this building is old, except the silk, which is always new, always arriving, always needing protection from the very structure that's supposed to shelter it. He gestures at the buckets dotting the aisles. We've learned to live with it. We know where the worst leaks are, and we keep those areas clear of valuable stock. We know which sections flood first, and we store the most precious silk on higher racks, away from the floor. We know that when the rain comes, we'll lose some, not much, but some, and we've built that loss into our calculations. Wang has joined you, his scribe's robe spattered with water, his expression sour. I'll have to record every bolt that got wet, he says. Every single one. Even if the water didn't touch the silk, even if we moved it in time, if there's any chance of moisture damage, I have to note it. The auditors will want to know. They always want to know. He pulls a wooden slip from his sleeve and begins making notes, his brush moving despite the dim light and the continuing drum of rain on the roof. You watch him work and think about the irony of it. The silk survived the weaver's hands, survived the journey to the warehouse, survived the inspections and the sorting and the stacking, and now it faces its greatest threat not from barbarians or bandits, but from water dripping through a roof that someone forgot to fix. The Empire can mobilize armies, build walls across thousands of miles, administer a population of millions, but it can't keep rain out of a warehouse. And yet, you realize, that's exactly why the system works. Because everyone knows the roof leaks, they've built redundancies into every level of storage. The silk on high racks stays dry. The silk in vulnerable areas is the least valuable. The buckets are in place before the first drop falls. The workers know their stations and their duties. And when the rain stops, which it will, eventually, the scribes will record every drop, every movement, every near miss, and the warehouse will return to its quiet rhythm until the next storm. A shout from across the warehouse draws your attention. Another leak. This one worse than the first. You follow Magistrate Liu and Wang as they hurry toward the sound, weaving between buckets and bales and workers still moving silk to safety. When you arrive, you find a scene of controlled chaos. Water pouring through a gap where several tiles have shifted, creating a cascade that's already soaked a stack of bales before anyone could reach them. The workers have formed a human chain, passing bales from hand to hand out of the danger zone, but the damage is done. Water has penetrated the wrappings of the lowest bales, and even as you watch, you can see it spreading, darkening the hemp, seeping toward the silk within. Magistrate Liu barks orders, and workers begin carefully opening the damaged bales, exposing the wet silk to the air in hopes of drying it before mold can take hold. You help where you can, passing bales, holding oiled cloth, fetching buckets. The work is exhausting, but there's something almost satisfying about it. The feeling of being useful, of contributing to the preservation of something larger than yourself. And through it all, you're learning about the fragility of silk, about the vigilance required to protect it, about the endless battle between human order and natural chaos. Hours later, the rain stops as suddenly as it began. One moment the drumming on the roof is deafening. The next, there's only the drip of water from eaves and the soft sound of workers catching their breath. The warehouse is a mess, buckets everywhere, bales stacked in temporary piles, wet patches on the floor, the air thick with moisture, but the crisis is over. No silk was lost, or at least not much. The damaged bales are being dried, their contents spread on tables in a specially prepared area where the air can circulate around them. Some of it will be salvageable. Some won't. Either way, Wang will record it all. Magistrate Liu finds you leaning against a pillar, your robes damp, your muscles aching. He hands you a cup of water, real water, for drinking, and you take it gratefully. You stayed, he says. You didn't have to. You could have found shelter and waited it out. But you stayed and worked. He studies you with an expression you can't quite read. You're not like most visitors. You're not sure what to say to that. So you just drink your water and watch as the warehouse slowly returns to order. Buckets are emptied and returned to their places. Bales are restacked, their tags checked and rechecked. Workers mop at the worst of the wet patches, spreading dry rushes on the floor to absorb the rest. And somewhere in the scribe's office, Wang is writing it all down, adding another chapter to the endless story of this building and its battle against the rain. The warehouse feels different after the rain. The air has cleared, washed clean by the storm, and the familiar sense of cedar and silk seems sharper, more present. You wander away from the bustle of cleanup, drawn by a pull you don't quite understand, until you find yourself in a part of the building you haven't visited before. The racks here are finer, the wood polished rather than rough-hewn, and the bales they hold are wrapped in cloth of a quality that would be respectable for clothing in most households. You found the imperial section, where the warehouse keeps silk destined for the emperor himself and his closest associates. Even the tags are different here, not plain wood but bamboo, carefully smoothed and inscribed with characters so elegant they seem to float above the surface. The cords that hold them are silk themselves, dyed in imperial yellow, and they glow in the lamplight like threads of captured sunshine. You reach out to touch one of the bales, then stop yourself. This silk isn't for casual handling. This silk is for the Son of Heaven, for the one who holds the mandate of heaven, for the living bridge between the human world and the celestial realm. To touch it without authorization would be, what? A crime, certainly. Perhaps a capital offense. But more than that, it would feel like a violation, like reaching out to brush the robe of a god. A voice speaks from behind you, soft and slightly amused. You can touch it. It won't bite. You turn to find a woman perhaps 50 years old, dressed in robes finer than any you've seen in the warehouse, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that speaks of wealth and status. She holds a small bronze key in one hand and an expression of calm authority in every line of her face. I am Lady Feng, she says, and this is my domain. The Emperor's silk passes through my hands before it goes anywhere else. If you're going to stand here gaping at it, you might as well learn something. She gestures for you to follow, and you do, drawn by the same curiosity that's led you through every corner of this building. Lady Feng moves through the imperial section with the confidence of long familiarity, pointing out details you would never have noticed on your own. This bale contains silk from Shu, she says, touching one of the yellow cords almost casually. The weavers there have supplied the imperial court for 3 centuries. Their silk is so fine that a single bolt can pass through a wedding ring. Try that with ordinary fabric and you'll be disappointed. She smiles slightly. Not that I recommend trying. The weavers guard their techniques as fiercely as generals guard their battle plans. You ask her how this silk differs from the ordinary bolts you've seen elsewhere, And she laughs, a genuine laugh, warm and surprisingly unguarded. How does an emperor differ from a peasant? In every way imaginable. The silk here is woven from cocoons selected by hand, fed on the finest mulberry leaves, harvested at exactly the right moment. The threads are thinner, more uniform, more lustrous. The weavers are the best in their commanderies, women who have spent their entire lives at the loom and can produce patterns so complex they seem to move as you watch. She pauses before a bale wrapped in cloth so fine you can see the pattern of the silk within through its protective covering. This one, for example. It's a tribute gift from the King of Huainan, sent to celebrate the emperor's birthday. The pattern shows dragons pursuing flaming pearls, a design only the imperial family is permitted to use. If anyone else wore this fabric, they'd be executed. Probably their entire family, too. You look at the bale with new eyes, seeing now the dragons half hidden in the shimmer of the silk, their scales catching the light in ways that seem almost alive. The workmanship is extraordinary, beyond anything you've seen in the regular sections, and you understand now why this silk is kept separate, guarded, treated with a reverence that borders on worship. Lady Feng continues her tour, pointing out bales from different commanderies, each with its own specialty. Qi produces the strongest silk, ideal for banners and ceremonial armor. Chu weaves patterns inspired by their southern forests, birds and flowers and creatures you've never seen unless you've traveled to their swamps. Yang sends silk dyed in colors that don't exist anywhere else. They have a secret, something they add to the dye bath, and no amount of imperial pressure has convinced them to share it. She shrugs. The emperor tolerates their secrecy because the colors are so beautiful. But he watches them closely, just in case. You pause before a bale wrapped in fabric that seems to glow with its own inner light, a pale gold that shifts to cream as you move. Lady Feng notices your interest and nods approvingly. That's the best of the best, she says. Silk from the imperial mulberry groves, raised by eunuchs specially appointed for the purpose, woven in workshops attached to the palace itself. No commandery produced this, it's entirely court-made, from silkworm to finished bolt. There are only 6 bales like this in existence, and they're all here, waiting for the emperor to decide what to do with them. You ask what he might do with them, and she considers the question seriously. Gifts, mostly. When a foreign king proves himself a loyal ally, he might receive a bolt of this silk as a sign of the emperor's favor. When a general wins a great victory, the emperor might send a length to be made into a robe for his wife. When a prince comes of age, he might receive enough for a full set of ceremonial garments. She touches the bale gently, almost wistfully. Or the emperor might simply keep them, adding to his store of treasure, because there's something satisfying about knowing you possess the finest things in the world, even if you never use them. The imperial section stretches on, aisle after aisle of the most exquisite silk you've ever seen. Some bales are small, containing only a single bolt of some experimental weave that may or may not succeed. Others are massive, holding enough fabric to clothe an entire palace full of courtiers. Each one is tagged and recorded and tracked with a precision that makes the regular warehouse systems look almost casual by comparison. Lady Feng leads you to a small room at the far end of the section, where a single bale rests on a stand of polished wood, as if it were a sculpture rather than a storage unit. This, she says quietly, is the reason I'm here. The reason I've spent my entire life in this warehouse, learning the secrets of silk, earning the trust of emperors. She gestures for you to approach, and you do, your footsteps suddenly feeling too loud in the reverent silence. The bale is wrapped in silk so fine it's almost transparent, and through it you can see the fabric within. A deep, impossible purple, the color of certain sea snails that live only in distant waters, a dye so rare and expensive that only the wealthiest can afford even a thread of it. The pattern, visible through the wrappings, shows phoenixes in flight, their wings spread across the silk in a design so intricate you can't quite follow it with your eyes. This silk came from the West, Lady Feng says. From a kingdom beyond the mountains, where they have a different kind of silkworm, one that produces thread of a slightly different character. Our weavers combined it with the best Chinese silk, dyed it with the rarest purple, and produced something that has never existed before and may never exist again. She smiles, a small private smile. The Emperor doesn't know about this yet. It's a surprise, for his 50th birthday. I've been keeping it here for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to present it. You stand before the bale, this impossible object, and you think about all the hands that contributed to its creation. The Western merchants who brought the rare silk, the fishermen who harvested the sea snails for dye, the weavers who combined everything into this single masterpiece, and now Lady Feng, guarding it with her life until the moment comes to reveal it. In this one bale, the entire empire is present. Its reach, its wealth, its artistry, its ambition. Lady Feng touches your arm gently. Come, she says. There's more to see, and the night is still young. But remember this moment. Remember that silk isn't just fabric. It's power, it's beauty, it's the physical manifestation of everything the Han Dynasty has achieved. And here, in this section, it's also something else. It's a gift, waiting to be given. You follow her back through the imperial section, past bale after bale of impossible beauty, and you know that you'll never look at silk the same way again. Leaving the imperial section feels like emerging from a temple. The air less charged, the light somehow dimmer, the world more ordinary. You wander back toward the warehouse's main thoroughfare, your mind still full of phoenixes and purple dyes, when a new sound draws your attention. It's a rhythm you've heard before but never really listened to. The click and slide of an abacus, wooden beads dancing on bamboo rods, faster than you would have thought possible. You follow the sound to a small room off the main aisle, its door propped open to admit whatever breeze might find its way through the warehouse. Inside, a man sits at a low table, his fingers moving across an abacus with a kind of speed that suggests he's been doing this since before he could walk. His eyes flicker between the beads and a stack of wooden slips beside him, and every few seconds he makes a notation on a fresh slip with a brush held in his other hand. This is Senior Accountant Zhao, and if Senior Scribe Wang is the conscience of the warehouse, Zhao is its brain. While Wang records what happens, Zhao calculates what it means. Every bolt has a value, and Zhao knows that value down to the last copper coin. Every movement of silk from one section to another changes the warehouse's financial position, and Zhao tracks that change with the precision of a hawk watching a field mouse. When the imperial treasury wants to know how much wealth is stored in this building, it's Zhao they ask, and Zhao they believe, because Zhao's numbers are never wrong. You watch from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but after a few minutes he looks up and gestures you inside. Don't just stand there, he says. If you're going to watch, watch properly. Come closer. You step into the room, which is even smaller than the scribe's office and considerably more cluttered. Slips are stacked everywhere, some tied in bundles, others loose, others still wet with fresh ink. The abacus at Zhao's fingertips is old, its wooden frame darkened by decades of use, its beads worn smooth by countless calculations. Zhao notices your gaze and holds up the abacus for inspection. My teacher gave me this, he says. His teacher gave it to him. The beads have been counted so many times that they've lost their original shape. Feel. He holds it out, and you run your finger over a bead, surprised by its smoothness, its almost greasy texture from years of skin contact. Every calculation I make is built on the calculations of everyone who came before me. If they made a mistake, it's my job to find it. If they were honest, it's my job to carry their work forward. He sets the abacus down carefully. No pressure, as you can imagine. He returns to his work, and you watch as his fingers fly across the beads, grouping and separating them in patterns that seem random but clearly follow some internal logic. The abacus, you realize, is not just a counting tool, it's an extension of his mind, a way of making the abstract concrete, of turning numbers into something he can touch and move and arrange. Each click of a bead is a thought made physical. Let me show you something, Zhao says, pausing in his calculations. He pulls a wooden slip from a nearby stack and holds it up for you to see. This is the record for a delivery from Langi Commandery last month. 40 bolts of plain silk, 12 of damask, 3 of brocade. Each bolt was weighed, measured, inspected, and assigned a quality grade. Now watch. He turns to his abacus and begins moving beads, his fingers blurring with speed. The plain silk is worth 3,000 coins per bolt, except for the 5 bolts that were downgraded to second quality. Those are worth 2,200. The damask is worth 6,000 per bolt, the brocade 10,000. But the brocade came from a special batch with a higher thread count, so it's actually worth 12,500, except that one bolt has a minor flaw near the edge that reduces its value to 9,000. He stops, taps a final bead, and looks up. Total value: 217,400 coins. Plus transport costs, inspection fees, and storage charges, which bring it to 223,000 even. And that's before we factor in the 3 bolts that were damaged in transit and had to be sold locally at a discount. He sets down his brush and leans back, rubbing his eyes. That's one delivery. One. And I have to do this for every delivery that arrives, every shipment that leaves, every transfer between sections, every loss from rain or insects or simple wear and tear. By the time I finish calculating the value of everything in this warehouse, it's time to start over because new silk has arrived and old silk has left and the whole equation has changed. You ask him how he keeps from going mad, and he laughs, a genuine laugh, surprising in its warmth. Who says I haven't? But madness is a luxury I can't afford. If my numbers are wrong, people die. Not directly, not immediately, but eventually. A general whose army isn't paid because the treasury thought there was less silk than there actually was, that general soldiers might mutiny, or desert, or simply refuse to fight. A commandery that's overcharged for its tribute obligations because I misvalued their silk, that commandery might not have enough left to feed its people through the winter. The numbers matter. They always matter. He gestures at the stacks of slips around him. Every one of these represents someone's labor, someone's hope, someone's life. The weaver who produced the silk. The farmer who grew the mulberry leaves. The merchant who transported it. The inspector who approved it. And somewhere down the line, the soldier who will wear it as a uniform, the official who will sit on it as a cushion, the bride who will be married in it as a gown. My job is to make sure that all those lives are properly accounted for, that the value of their work is recognized and recorded and preserved. You look at the slips with new eyes, seeing them now not just as records but as a kind of moral ledger, a statement of what the empire owes to its people and what its people owe to the empire. In Zhao's calculations, you realize, the abstract concept of value becomes concrete, measurable, real. The silk is worth what he says it's worth, and that worth determines everything that follows. Zhao returns to his abacus, his fingers finding their rhythm again. You want to know the strangest thing? He says without looking up. The silk itself doesn't care. It doesn't know how much it's worth. It doesn't know where it came from or where it's going. It's just threads, woven together by women who will never see the prices their work commands. The value exists entirely in our heads, in the heads of people like me, who assign numbers to things and then act as if those numbers were real. He pauses, his hands hovering over the beads. And yet, without those numbers, the empire couldn't function. We couldn't trade, couldn't tax, couldn't pay our soldiers or build our roads or feed our cities. The numbers are made up, but they're the most important made-up thing we have. He resumes his calculations, and you watch for a while longer, mesmerized by the dance of his fingers and the steady click of beads. The room grows quieter, the sounds of the warehouse fading into the background, until all you can hear is the abacus and Zhao's occasional murmur as he reads another figure from a slip. Finally, he sets down his brush and stretches, his joints popping audibly. "I need tea," he announces. "And you look like you could use some too. Come, there's a pot in the corner, and I've been told I make a decent brew." He rises and moves to a small brazier where a clay pot sits warming, and you accept the cup he offers gratefully. The tea is bitter and slightly smoky, nothing like the delicate brews you've had elsewhere, but it's warm and it's real and it grounds you in the moment. As you sip, Zhao looks at you with an expression that might be curiosity or might be something else entirely. "You've been here a while," he says. "Most people pass through, see the silk, marvel at the quantities, and leave. But you're still here, watching, learning." He takes a sip of his own tea. "What are you looking for?" You don't have an answer. Not really. But as you sit in the small room, surrounded by the accumulated calculations of a lifetime, you begin to understand that the question itself might be the answer. You're not looking for anything specific. You're looking for everything, for the story behind the silk, for the lives behind the numbers, for the meaning hidden in the click of beads and the scratch of brushes. And here, in Zhao's crowded office, you're finding it. You leave Zhao to his calculations and his tea, stepping back into the warehouse's main aisle with the taste of bitter brew still lingering on your tongue. The air has shifted again, cooler now, with the particular stillness that settles in after a storm has passed and the world is catching its breath. You walk without purpose, letting your feet carry you where they will, and eventually you find yourself in a section of the warehouse you haven't explored before. The racks here are different. Instead of the usual open shelving, these compartments are enclosed, their fronts fitted with wooden panels that can be slid aside for access. The bales within are wrapped more tightly than elsewhere, their protective coverings doubled and in some cases tripled, and the air around them carries a sharp, herbal scent that makes your nose prickle. This is the warehouse's front line in a war that never ends, a war against moths, against beetles, against any insect with the temerity to view imperial silk as a potential meal. And the weapons in this war are not swords or spears but cedar wood, wormwood, and an arsenal of bitter herbs ground into powders and tucked into every available crevice. You slide open one of the panels and lean closer, breathing in the concentrated scent of the compartment. Cedar, yes, the racks themselves are made of it, chosen specifically for its insect-repelling properties. But beneath the cedar is something sharper, almost medicinal, and you realize it's wormwood, the same herb you noticed when you first entered the warehouse, now concentrated in sachets tucked between every bale. And under that, fainter but still present, is something else. Something you can't identify, a scent that seems to shift and change as you try to pin it down. A voice speaks from beside you, and you startle, not having heard anyone approach. "That's the mixture," the voice says. "Don't ask me what's in it. I don't know, and if I did know, I couldn't tell you." You turn to find a man perhaps 60 years old, his face lined and weathered, his hands stained with something that might be dye or might be the residue of years handling herbs. He carries a basket over one arm, filled with small cloth bags that match the ones you see tucked between the bales. He introduces himself as Old Chen, though he's quick to clarify that he's not related to the younger Chen you met earlier. "Different Chen," he says. "Common name. Anyway, I'm the one who keeps the bugs from eating the Emperor's profits." He gestures at the basket. "Fresh sachets. The old ones lose their strength after a few months, so I go through every section, every rack, every compartment, replacing them on a rotating schedule. It's not exciting work, but it's necessary. Without me, this warehouse would be a buffet." You ask him about the mixture, and he shrugs. "Like I said, I don't know exactly what's in it. The formula comes from the imperial apothecary, and they guard it like state secrets. I get the sachets pre-filled, delivered in sealed containers, and I just place them where they need to go. If I opened one to see what's inside, I'd probably be executed. If I sold the information to someone who wanted to protect their own silk, definitely executed. So I don't ask questions. I just put the little bags where they belong and move on. He slides a panel fully open and begins his work, removing old sachets and replacing them with fresh ones, his movements efficient and practiced. You watch as he checks each bale, not just the sachets but the wrappings themselves, looking for signs that insects might have breached the defenses. A small hole in a wrapper catches his attention, and he pauses, bending closer to examine it. "This is trouble," he murmurs, more to himself than to you. He reaches into a pouch at his belt and withdraws a thin knife, which he uses to carefully enlarge the hole. Inside, you can see the silk itself, and on its surface, tiny dark specks that move almost imperceptibly. Moth larvae, you realize, already hatched and feeding. Old Chen doesn't panic. He simply reaches into another pouch, withdraws a small clay pot, and carefully sprinkles its contents over the affected area. The specks stop moving almost immediately, and he nods with satisfaction. "Quicklime," he explains. "Kills them on contact. But the silk is damaged. See those tiny holes? That bolt will have to be downgraded, maybe cut down for smaller uses." He makes a notation on a wooden slip and tucks it into the bales tags, ensuring that whoever handles it next will know what's happened. You ask him how often this happens, and he considers the question while continuing his work. "Less than you might think, more than I'd like. The defenses are good, but they're not perfect. A moth can find its way through the smallest gap, lay its eggs where no one will notice for weeks. By the time we find them, the damage is done." He slides another panel closed and moves to the next compartment. The worst part is, we never know where the next attack will come from. Could be a bale that arrived already infested, the eggs hidden deep inside where no one thought to look. Could be a crack in the wall that lets in a single pregnant moth. Could be a worker who carried an egg in on their clothing without knowing it. The enemy is everywhere, and we just have to keep fighting. He pauses, looking at you with an expression that might be amusement. "You think I'm being dramatic. But I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen whole sections wiped out because someone got lazy about replacing sachets. I've seen silk that survived the journey from the farthest corners of the empire, only to be destroyed in a month by insects that found a way through a gap you couldn't slip a hair through. This is war. It's just a very slow, very quiet war, fought with herbs and vigilance." You follow him as he works, watching the rhythm of his movements: open, check, replace, close, move on, and you begin to appreciate the scale of his task. The warehouse is vast, and every compartment needs attention, not just once but repeatedly, in an endless cycle that will continue as long as there's silk to protect. Old Chen's hands have performed these motions tens of thousands of times, and they'll perform them tens of thousands more before he's done. He stops before a compartment that seems no different from the others, but his expression changes as he slides open the panel. "Ah," he says softly. "Now this is interesting." He reaches in and withdraws a sachet that's darker than the others, its contents clumped and discolored. "Mold," he explains. "Moisture got in somehow, and the sachet absorbed it. The herbs inside are ruined, and worse, they might have started to rot themselves, which would attract the very insects they're meant to repel." He sets the damaged sachet aside and carefully inspects the surrounding area, looking for signs that moisture has spread to the bales themselves. The wrappings are damp, he finds, but the silk within seems unaffected, for now. He makes another notation, this one more urgent, and tucks it prominently into the bale's tags. "This whole section needs to be checked," he mutters. "If one sachet got wet, others might have too. And if moisture is getting in somewhere, we need to find it before the next rain." He glances at you. "You see? The war never ends. Even when we win one battle, There's always another waiting. He continues his work, and you continue to follow, learning the subtle signs that indicate trouble. The way a sachet should look, the feel of a wrapper that's too dry or too damp, the tiny holes that betray an insect's presence. By the time he reaches the end of his section, you've begun to see the warehouse through his eyes. Not as a static collection of goods, but as a living system, constantly under threat, constantly fighting back. Old Chen straightens up with a groan, pressing a hand to his lower back. "That's enough for now," he says. "The rest will have to wait until tomorrow." He looks at you with something like approval. "You've got a good eye. Not everyone notices the details. If you ever need work, come find me. I could use an assistant who actually pays attention." You thank him but decline. You're not planning to stay, after all, and the war against moths is not your war to fight. But as you watch him gather his tools and head for the exit, you feel a new respect for the quiet battles that keep the empire running, fought by people like Old Chen whose names will never appear in any history book. You leave Old Chen to his quiet war and wander deeper into the warehouse, your thoughts still full of sachets and quicklime and the endless vigilance required to keep silk safe from nature's appetites. The aisle you're following curves gently, and you realize you've entered a section that feels different from the rest, not in its construction, but in its atmosphere. The air here is charged with something you can't quite name, a tension that makes you walk more carefully, breathe more quietly. Ahead, you see a small group of workers gathered around a table, their postures rigid with something that might be anger or might be fear. As you approach, you catch fragments of their conversation, never seen anything like it. And the seals looked perfect. And whoever did this knew what they were doing. You step closer, and they part to let you see what's on the table. It's a bolt of silk, unrolled to reveal its full length. At first glance, it looks ordinary, cream-colored, plain weave, the kind of everyday fabric that fills most of the warehouse's common sections. But as you look closer, you notice something wrong. The color is slightly off, a shade too yellow where it should be cream. The texture, when you dare to touch it, is wrong too. Slightly rougher than it should be, the threads not quite as fine as they appear at first glance. This, you realize, is a counterfeit. Someone tried to pass off inferior silk as the real thing, and they almost succeeded. The man in charge of the inspection, his name, you learn, is Inspector Hu, and he's been with the warehouse for 20 years, holds up a magnifying lens and invites you to look closer. Through the lens, the flaws become obvious. Threads of uneven thickness, places where the weave loosens and tightens irregularly, tiny knots where broken threads have been tied rather than properly rewoven. None of these flaws would be visible to the casual observer, but to Hu's trained eye, they scream fake as loudly as a shout. "Look at the edge," Hu says, pointing to the selvage where the fabric finishes. In genuine silk, the edge is clean and even, the threads turning back into the weave in a consistent pattern. Here, the edge is ragged, threads loose and irregular, the pattern broken in places. Whoever made this knew enough to make the main fabric look passable, Hu explains, but they didn't bother with the edges. Probably thought no one would check. They were wrong. You ask how the counterfeit was discovered, and Hu's expression darkens. Routine check. We pull random bolts for reinspection, especially if they come from commanderies with a history of problems. This one came from a region that's usually reliable, so it was a surprise when my assistant noticed something off about the color. He shakes his head. If we hadn't caught it, this bolt would have been mixed in with the genuine silk, sent out to who knows where, and someone would have ended up with inferior goods at premium prices. The emperor's reputation would suffer. The empire's credibility would suffer. All because someone decided to cut corners. The workers around the table murmur agreement, and you sense that this is more than just a professional concern for them. Counterfeiting is an attack on the system they've spent their lives maintaining, a betrayal of the trust that holds the entire tribute network together. If silk can't be trusted, then the whole edifice of imperial wealth begins to crumble. Who notices your interest and gestures for you to follow him to a smaller table nearby, where another bolt lies unrolled. This one is different. The silk itself seems genuine, but the tags attached to it tell a conflicting story. This is the other kind of counterfeit, who says. The silk is real enough, but the documentation is forged. Someone took ordinary silk and attached tags claiming it came from a commandery known for high quality, hoping the extra value would go unnoticed. He points to the characters on the tags. See the brushwork? It's close, but not quite right. The original scribe from that commandery had a distinctive way of forming this character. A slight flourish here, a heavier stroke there. The forger copied it well, but not well enough. You study the characters, and even with your limited understanding, you can see what he means. The strokes are slightly stiff, as if the writer was concentrating too hard on getting them right. Genuine tags, written by scribes who've been making the same marks for decades, have a fluency that's almost impossible to fake. Who continues his lesson, pulling out examples from the warehouse's collection of seized counterfeits. Some are crude, easily spotted by even a novice inspector. Others are so sophisticated that they fooled multiple examiners before finally being caught. One bolt, he shows you, was so well made that it took a year to identify. The silk was genuine high-quality material, the tags were perfect copies, the seals were authentic, stolen, they later learned, from a corrupt official. And it was only when the bolt reached its final destination and the recipient noticed something odd about the pattern that the truth came out. How do they do it? You ask, and who shrugs? However they can. Some steal genuine silk and replace it with inferior material, then sell the real stuff on the black market. Some bribe inspectors to look the other way. Some set up their own workshops and try to replicate the weaving techniques, though that rarely works. The skills take generations to develop, and you can't fake that kind of knowledge overnight. He picks up a seized bolt and holds it to the light. The clever ones don't try to make the silk perfect. They make it almost perfect, good enough to pass a quick inspection, knowing that most checks are quick. It's only when someone like me takes the time to really look that the flaws become visible. You ask what happens to the counterfeiters when they're caught, and whose expression turns grim. If they're lucky, they're executed quickly. If they're not lucky, they're made an example of, public humiliation, confiscation of all property, enslavement of their entire family. The emperor takes a dim view of anyone who tries to cheat the system. He sets the bolt down carefully. And honestly, so do I. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. If people can't trust that the silk they're buying is what it claims to be, then the whole economy falls apart. Merchants stop trading. Commanderies stop sending tribute. The empire stops functioning. So yes, we deal harshly with counterfeiters. We have to. A worker approaches with another suspicious bolt, and who excuses himself to examine it, leaving you alone with the collection of seized fakes. You study them one by one, trying to see what the inspectors see, training your eye to notice the subtle signs of deception. After a while, you begin to pick out patterns, the too perfect edges that actually indicate a lack of skill, the slightly off colors that betray different dye sources, the tags whose characters seem to hesitate on the wood. Historians still argue whether the Han Dynasty's obsession with authenticity was a strength or a weakness. On one hand, it created a system of quality control that was the envy of the ancient world, ensuring that silk from China was trusted everywhere from the steppes of Central Asia to the markets of Rome. On the other hand, it required an enormous bureaucratic apparatus, endless inspections, and a legal code so harsh that even minor infractions could result in execution. Was it worth it? The debate continues, with passionate arguments on both sides. But standing here, surrounded by the evidence of human ingenuity turned to deception, You begin to understand why the Han felt so strongly about it. The silk wasn't just fabric, it was a promise, a guarantee, a statement that the empire could be trusted. And every counterfeit was a broken promise, a hole in the fabric of trust that held everything together. You pick up one of the seized bolts, a particularly skillful fake, and hold it to the light. The silk shimmers, beautiful and deceptive, and you wonder about the hands that made it. Were they desperate, forced into crime by poverty or circumstance? Were they greedy, tempted by the enormous profits that successful counterfeiting could bring? Or were they simply skilled weavers who realized that their talents could earn more on the black market than they ever could through legitimate work? The bolt doesn't answer, of course. It just lies there in your hands, beautiful and false, a reminder that even in the most orderly systems, chaos is always waiting to break through. You set down the counterfeit bolt and turn away from Inspector Who's table, your mind still turning over the implications of what you've seen. The warehouse seems different now, not just a place of order and system, but a place where order is constantly under threat, where every bolt carries the potential for deception, where trust is earned one inspection at a time. You wander without direction, letting the aisles guide you, and eventually you find yourself in a part of the building you haven't explored before. The light here is dimmer, the racks lower, the atmosphere somehow quieter. And the goods stored on these shelves aren't silk. You've found the warehouse's secondary storage, where the empire keeps everything that isn't fabric but is still valuable enough to merit imperial protection. You run your hand along a rack of lacquerware, the pieces arranged in neat rows, their surfaces gleaming in the lamplight even after years of storage. Cups and boxes and trays, each one built from layers of lacquer so carefully applied that they've survived decades without cracking or fading. The workmanship is extraordinary. You can see your reflection in the surface of a cup, distorted but clear, and the patterns painted on the lacquer are so fine they might have been made by insects rather than human hands. A label on the rack tells you these came from Shu Commandery, the same region that produces some of the empire's finest silk. Lacquer is trickier than silk. You learn from a passing worker who notices your interest. Too dry and it cracks, too damp and it mildews, too hot and it softens, too cold and it becomes brittle. The warehouse has to maintain different conditions for different sections, which is why the lacquer is stored here, away from the silk, in a part of the building where the temperature and humidity can be controlled separately. You move on, passing racks of bronze mirrors stacked in wooden crates, their polished surfaces wrapped in soft cloth to prevent scratching. Each mirror is slightly different, some plain, some decorated with intricate patterns, some inscribed with characters promising good fortune or long life to whoever looks into them. You pick one up carefully, unwrapping a corner to see your face reflected in metal that hasn't been polished in years. The image is dim, distorted, but it's you, or a version of you, captured in bronze that was mined and smelted and shaped by hands that turned to dust centuries ago. Beyond the mirrors, you find hemp cloth, bolts of it, stacked like the silk but coarser, more utilitarian. This is what the common people wear, what soldiers use for tents and banners, what the empire consumes in quantities that dwarf even the massive silk stocks. A label tells you this hemp came from the north, where the fiber grows strong and rough, perfect for hard use. Next to it, a smaller stack of ramie cloth, finer than hemp but not as fine as silk, used for the robes of minor officials and the better class of commoner. You walk deeper into this section, past shelves of bamboo mats rolled and tied with cord, past baskets of dried herbs sealed in clay jars, past stacks of paper, actual paper, still a relatively new invention in the Han Dynasty, valuable enough to store in a guarded warehouse. You touch a sheet carefully, marveling at its fragility, its difference from the wooden slips and bamboo strips that still serve as the empire's primary writing material. Paper is the future, you know, though the people storing it here probably don't realize just how revolutionary it will become. A small rack catches your attention, its contents unlike anything else you've seen. These are bundles of something that looks like thin leather but isn't. It's rawhide, you realize, processed and cut into strips for use in everything from sandal soles to shield coverings. Next to it, bundles of horsehair, sorted by color and length, waiting to become brushes or rope or the tassels on officials' hats. And beyond that, baskets of feathers, goose feathers, mostly, but also the brilliant blue-green feathers of kingfishers, so precious that each one is individually wrapped in soft cloth. You're so absorbed in these discoveries that you don't notice the approach of footsteps until a voice speaks directly behind you. You found the oddities section. You turn to find a woman perhaps 40 years old, her robes plain but clean, her expression curious rather than suspicious. She introduces herself as Supervisor Ma, and she's in charge of everything in the warehouse that isn't silk. People think this place is all about fabric, she says, gesturing at the surrounding racks. And mostly they're right. Silk is what we're known for, what the emperor cares about most. But the empire needs more than just cloth, and all of it passes through somewhere. This is my somewhere. She leads you through the aisles, pointing out items and explaining their significance with the easy authority of someone who spent years mastering her domain. The lacquerware from Shu, she tells you, is destined for the palace, where it will hold the emperor's food and drink. The bronze mirrors will go to noble families as gifts or to frontier garrisons where soldiers need to maintain their appearance. The hemp will become tents and uniforms and the sails of ships on the Yellow River. The paper, she lingers over this, is experimental, still being tested, but if it proves durable enough, it could transform how the empire keeps its records. Everything has its place, Supervisor Ma says. Everything has its value. The trick is knowing what that value is and storing each item accordingly. The lacquer needs different conditions than the hemp. The feathers need protection from insects that would ignore the bronze entirely. The paper, she shakes her head, the paper is a problem. No one's quite sure how to store it yet. We're learning as we go. You stop before a rack of clay jars sealed with wax and cloth, their surfaces labeled with characters describing their contents. Supervisor Ma sees your interest and reads a few aloud: honey from Shu, ginger from Sichuan, cassia from the south, pepper from somewhere beyond the empire's borders. Spices and sweeteners, all of them valuable, all of them stored here until someone needs them. She taps one jar gently. This honey is 10 years old. Still good. Honey never goes bad, if it's sealed properly. The emperor could open this jar tomorrow and find it as fresh as the day it was made. You ask her how many different types of goods are stored in her section, and she laughs. How many grains of sand on a riverbank? I stopped counting years ago. Every commandery sends something, and every something is different. Some years we get more of one thing, less of another. Some years we get things we've never seen before, like that paper, or like the time someone sent a crate of giant clam shells from the Southern Sea. What are we supposed to do with giant clam shells? We stored them. That's what we do. She leads you to a corner of her domain where the racks give way to open floor space, and there, arranged in careful rows, are objects too large for shelving. Wooden chests bound with iron, their contents unknown. Rolls of carpet from the western regions, their patterns faded but still visible. A dismantled chariot, its parts labeled and wrapped, waiting for someone to remember it's here and put it back together. Some things never leave, Supervisor Ma says quietly. They come in, we store them, and then, nothing. No one ever asks for them. No record explains why they're here. They just sit, year after year, accumulating dust and mystery. She touches one of the chests almost tenderly. This one arrived 30 years ago, from a commandery that no longer exists. The records say it contains tribute for the emperor, but they don't say what kind of tribute, or why it was sent, or why it was never delivered. I could open it, I suppose. But then I'd have to document what I found, and that would raise questions, and those questions would need answers, and... She trails off, shrugging. So it sits. Maybe next year someone will come looking for it. You stand in the corner of the warehouse, surrounded by the empire's accumulated oddities, and you think about all the stories these objects could tell if they could speak. The giant clam shells from the southern sea, carried thousands of miles to end up in this dark corner. The dismantled chariot, waiting for a battle that never came. The chest from a vanished commandery, its secret still sealed inside. Each one is a mystery, a question without an answer, a story that will never be told. Supervisor Ma leaves you to explore on your own, called away by some duty only she understands. You wander through her domain for another hour, discovering new oddities around every corner. A cage that once held exotic birds, the birds themselves long dead, their bones probably swept away years ago. A set of musical instruments from a Western kingdom, a stack of hides from animals you can't identify, a bundle of spices so pungent they make your eyes water even through their wrappings. And through it all, you're aware that somewhere in this building, the silk still waits, 47,000 bolts of it, plus whatever arrived while you were exploring other sections. But for now, you're content to lose yourself in the warehouse's odd corners, discovering the things that aren't silk but are still valuable enough to deserve a place in this vast, quiet museum of imperial wealth. You tear yourself away from Supervisor Ma's oddities eventually, drawn by a growing commotion near the warehouse's main entrance. Voices call out instructions, feet scuff against wooden floors, and through it all runs the familiar rustle of silk being moved. You follow the sound and find yourself at the loading dock, where a scene of organized chaos unfolds before you. A caravan is being prepared. Bales of silk are emerging from the warehouse's depths, carried by workers who move with the careful urgency of people handling something infinitely precious. Outside, through the open doors, you can see the animals waiting. Camels, mostly, their supercilious expressions suggesting they've seen all this before and find it mildly amusing. Packed around them are handlers, guards, and a man in finer robes who's clearly in charge, consulting a wooden board and barking occasional orders. You step outside, breathing air that tastes different after hours inside the warehouse. Fresher, more alive, carrying scents of dust and animals and the distant green of growing things. The sun has shifted since you last saw it, lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the compound. Evening is approaching, but for this caravan, the journey is just beginning. The man in charge notices you and strides over, his expression a mix of exhaustion and barely contained excitement. He introduces himself as Captain Zhang, and has been leading caravans along the Silk Road for 20 years. This is the best part, he says, gesturing at the loading operation. And the worst. The best because we're finally moving, finally doing something after weeks of preparation. The worst because this is when everything can go wrong. A dropped bale, a frightened camel, a miscommunication about weights, any of it can delay us by days. You watch as workers maneuver a bale toward a waiting camel, its hump already padded with a specially designed saddle. The bale is lifted, positioned, and lashed into place with ropes that crisscross in patterns you're beginning to recognize as intentional, each knot serving a specific purpose. The camel accepts this with the philosophical resignation of its kind, chewing slowly and watching the proceedings with half-lidded eyes. Captain Zhang explains the logistics as the loading continues. We're taking 300 bolts to the western regions, he says. Gifts for the kings of various small states, trade goods for markets along the way, and a special shipment for the garrison at Dunhuang. They need new banners, and the old ones are practically falling apart. He consults his board. Plus 50 bolts of plain silk for the soldiers' pay. They'd rather have coins, but coins are heavy and silk is light, so silk it is. You ask about the route, and he pulls a mental map into focus, gesturing vaguely westward. First stop, the Hushi corridor. That's the easy part. Well-marked roads, regular watering points, guards stationed along the way. Then Dunhuang, where we drop off the banners and pick up any messages going east. Then the passes through the mountains, which are not easy. Cold at night, hot during the day, bandits in some sections, unfriendly locals in others. After that, the Tarim Basin, desert, mostly, with oases where we can rest and trade. And finally, the kingdoms of the West, where we give away the gifts and hope the kings feel generous in return. He makes it sound almost routine, but you can hear the undercurrent of danger in his voice. The Silk Road isn't a road, not really. It's a network of paths and tracks and hopeful directions, crossing some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Bandits are a constant threat, but so are weather, disease, diplomatic complications, and the simple fact that camels are ornery creatures who sometimes just decide they're not going any further today. A worker approaches with a question about weight distribution, and Captain Zheng excuses himself to deal with it. You wander among the animals, watching as more bales are loaded onto their backs. Each camel carries 2 bales, one on each side of its hump, balanced so carefully that the animal barely seems to notice the added burden. The bales themselves are wrapped more heavily than the ones in the warehouse, with multiple layers of oiled cloth to protect against rain and dust and the curious teeth of desert rodents. You stop beside a camel that's already loaded, its bales labeled with characters you can now partially read. These bolts are from Shu, you see, medium quality, destined for a king whose name you don't recognize. You run your hand over the wrappings, feeling the familiar shape of silk beneath, and you think about where this fabric is going. In a few months, it will be unrolled in some distant court, examined by people who have never seen a mulberry tree, who may have only the vaguest idea of where China even is. They'll touch it, marvel at it, maybe wear it on special occasions, and they'll never know anything about the women who wove it or the inspectors who approved it or the scribes who recorded its passage through this warehouse. Captain Zheng returns, his board now covered with fresh notations. Almost ready, he says. Just waiting on the last few bales from the imperial section. Lady Feng is signing them out personally. She doesn't trust anyone else with the really good stuff. He glances at the sky. We need to leave within the hour. There's a garrison about half a day's march from here, and I want to reach it before full dark. The road's safe enough in daylight, but at night. He trails off, shrugging. You ask him about the dangers, and he considers the question seriously. Bandits are the obvious one, he says. But honestly, they're not as common as you'd think. A well-guarded caravan is hard to attack, and most bandits would rather find easier targets. The real dangers are the ones you don't expect. A water source that's dried up since last year. A local official who decides he wants a bribe before he'll let you pass. A camel that steps in a hole and breaks its leg, leaving you with 1,000 pounds of cargo and no way to move it. He shakes his head. Every journey is different. Every journey has its own problems. The trick is being ready for whatever comes. A shout from the warehouse draws his attention, and you both turn to see the last bales emerging, carried by workers who move with extra care. These are the imperial gifts, you realize. The finest silk in the warehouse, destined for kings who may or may not appreciate what they're receiving. Lady Feng follows close behind, her expression that of a mother watching her children leave home for the first time. The bales are loaded with particular ceremony, each one placed on its own camel and lashed into place with ropes that Captain Zheng himself checks and double-checks. Lady Feng speaks quietly to him, pointing at the bales and gesturing emphatically, and he nods with the patience of someone who's heard these instructions many times before. Finally, the last bale is secured, the last rope tied, the last check completed. Captain Zheng stands back and surveys his caravan. 20 camels, each carrying 2 bales, plus a dozen guards on horses, plus the handlers and drivers and the cook and the various other people required to keep such an expedition alive. It's a small army, you realize, not in numbers but in organization, in the sheer complexity of keeping so many creatures and people moving in the same direction. Captain Zheng turns to you and offers a formal bow. We leave now, he says. "If you're ever in the western regions, look for me. I'll be the one arguing with a camel about which direction we're supposed to be going." He smiles briefly, then turns and strides toward the lead animal, shouting orders as he goes. You watch as the caravan forms up, camels rising on their ungainly legs, guards taking their positions, handlers making final adjustments. Then, with a creak of saddles and a shuffle of feet, they begin to move. The lead camel takes a step, then another, and the rest follow, a slow wave of motion that carries them away from the warehouse and toward the setting sun. You stand at the loading dock, watching until the last camel disappears into the gathering dusk. Behind you, the warehouse waits, still full of silk, still full of stories. But some of those stories are now on the move, heading west along roads you'll never travel, toward destinations you'll never see. And somewhere out there, in a distant kingdom, a king will unwrap a bolt of shoe silk and wonder at its beauty, never knowing the long chain of hands that brought it to him. The caravan disappears into the twilight, and you turn back toward the warehouse. The loading dock feels strangely empty now, the bustle of preparation replaced by a quiet that seems to settle over everything like dust. You step back inside, and the familiar sense of cedar and silk wrap around you like a welcome. But something has changed. The warehouse at night is different from the warehouse during the day. The workers have mostly gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain the vigil. The oil lamps burn lower, their flames shrinking to conserve fuel, casting long shadows that shift and dance as you move past. The silence is deeper, more present, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant scurry of something small and probably unwanted. You find yourself wandering toward a small room near the entrance, where a single lamp burns and a figure sits in the doorway, a cup of tea in one hand and a sword within easy reach of the other. This is the night guard, a man named Old Jong who's been keeping the overnight watch for as long as anyone can remember. He's ancient, 70 at least, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that miss nothing despite their years. He sees you approaching and gestures to a stool beside him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asks, and you realize he assumes you're one of the workers, not a visitor. You don't correct him. Happens to everyone their first few nights. The warehouse talks at night, and it takes time to learn its language. You sit beside him, accepting a cup of tea from the pot he keeps warm on a small brazier. The tea is weak and slightly stale, but it's warm, and it feels good in your hands as the night air cools around you. Old Jong sips his own tea in silence, his eyes moving constantly, scanning the darkness beyond the lamplight with the practiced attention of someone who spent a lifetime watching. After a while, he speaks again, his voice low and thoughtful. "People think this is an easy job. Sit here, drink tea, maybe take a walk around every few hours. What could happen? The silk's not going anywhere." He chuckles softly. "They don't know. They don't hear what I hear." You ask what he hears, and he leans forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Everything. The building settling, that's normal, I've learned to ignore it. The rats in the walls, also normal, though we do our best to keep them out. But sometimes there are other sounds. Footsteps where no one should be walking. The creak of a door that should be locked. The whisper of voices when everyone's supposed to be gone." He taps the sword beside him. "That's why I keep this close. Most nights, nothing happens. But the nights when something does happen, those are the nights I earn my pay." He tells you stories as the night deepens around you. Stories of attempted thefts, of thieves who thought they could slip past the guards and make off with enough silk to live comfortably for years. Most were caught before they got anywhere near the good stuff, tripped up by the warehouse's labyrinthine layout or by guards like Old Jong who'd been watching so long they could sense when something was wrong. A few made it further, only to find that the bales they targeted were too heavy to carry, or that the tags they'd relied on to identify valuable silk were deliberately misleading. One particularly ambitious gang spent months planning their heist, only to discover on the night of the attempt that the silk they'd been targeting had been moved to a different section weeks earlier. The warehouse protects itself, old Zhong says. All those scribes and inspectors and accountants, they're not just keeping records, they're creating a kind of memory, a way of knowing where everything is and where everything should be. When something's out of place, it's like a wrong note in a song. Anyone who's been here long enough can hear it. He falls silent for a moment, listening to something you can't hear. Then he relaxes slightly and continues. The worst wasn't thieves, though. The worst was the fire. 20 years ago. Maybe more. A lamp tipped over in the lacquer section. Different warehouse, not this one, but the story spread. Burned for 3 days, they say. Destroyed everything. The scribes lost records going back centuries. The accountant had to reconstruct values from memory, from fragments, from whatever they could salvage. He shakes his head slowly. After that, every warehouse in the empire changed its rules. More buckets, more sand, more guards walking the aisles at night. And lamps like this 1 inch, he gestures at the small flame beside them, never left unattended. You learn from other people's disasters, if you're smart. You sit with him through the watches of the night, listening to his stories and to the sounds of the warehouse around you. Gradually, you begin to hear what he hears, the subtle creaks that are just the building breathing, the scuttles that are just rats being rats, the distant hoot of an owl somewhere beyond the walls. And beneath it all, the silence of the silk itself, thousands of bales resting in the darkness, waiting for morning. Around midnight, old Zhong rises and gestures for you to follow. Time for the rounds, he says. You can come, if you want. Just stay close and don't touch anything. You follow him into the darkness, his lamp casting a small pool of light that barely reaches the nearest racks. He moves with the confidence of long familiarity, his feet finding the path even where the light doesn't reach. You pass through sections you visited before, seeing them now in a completely different way. The bales loom in the darkness like sleeping animals, their shapes barely visible at the edge of the lamplight. The shadows between racks seem deeper, more mysterious, full of possibilities that don't exist during the day. Old Zhong stops occasionally to listen, to sniff the air, to run his hand along a support pillar as if checking for signs of trouble only he would recognize. At one point, he pauses and holds up a hand for silence. You freeze, listening, and after a moment you hear it too, a soft scratching sound, somewhere in the darkness ahead. Old Zhong moves forward silently, his sword now in his hand, and you follow with your heart beating faster than you'd like to admit. The scratching leads you to a corner of the warehouse you haven't explored, where the racks give way to open storage. There, in the lamplight, you see the source of the sound, a rat, large and unconcerned, gnawing at the corner of a wooden crate. It looks up as you approach, regards you with beady indifference, and returns to its work. Old Zhong relaxes slightly, though he doesn't sheath his sword. Rats, he mutters. Always rats. We set traps, we bring in cats, we seal every hole we find, and still they come. He moves closer, and the rat finally decides discretion is the better part of survival, disappearing into a shadowy corner. Old Zhong examines the crate, running his fingers over the gnawed area. Didn't get through, he reports. This crate's reinforced. But we'll need to move it tomorrow, check for damage, maybe set some fresh traps in this area. He makes a mental note and continues his rounds. You follow him through the rest of the warehouse, seeing it all through his eyes. The vulnerable points where a fire could start, the shadows where a thief could hide, the corners where rats might find a way in. By the time you return to his post near the entrance, the first hints of grey are showing in the eastern sky, and you realize you've been awake all night. Old Zhong settles back onto his stool, pouring himself fresh tea with hands that don't shake despite his years. Another night survived, he says. They add up. You know. One after another, Until suddenly you've been doing this for 40 years and you can't imagine doing anything else. He looks at you with something like approval. You lasted the whole night. Most people would have fallen asleep hours ago. Maybe you've got the calling. You're not sure about that, but you're grateful for the experience, for the chance to see the warehouse in its nighttime aspect, to understand that the work never really stops, that even when everyone else has gone home, someone is still watching, still listening, still protecting the silk from all the things that would harm it. The grey light of dawn is just beginning to seep through the high windows when you hear it. A sound that doesn't belong, that cuts through the quiet like a knife through silk. Hoofbeats, approaching fast, multiple horses moving at a speed that suggests urgency rather than routine. Old Jong hears it too, his hand going to his sword, his eyes narrowing as he peers toward the entrance. The horses pull up outside, and a moment later a man strides through the doors, still dusty from the road, his robes those of an imperial courier. He's young, perhaps 25, but his face carries the strain of hard riding and bad news. He spots old Jong and strides over, speaking rapidly in a voice that carries through the quiet warehouse. "Auditors," he says. "From Chang'an. They're 2 days behind me, maybe less. The Emperor wants a full inventory, everything counted, everything verified, everything ready for inspection when they arrive." He pulls a sealed document from his sleeve and thrusts it at old Jong, who takes it with the expression of someone accepting a death sentence. You watch as old Jong breaks the seal and reads, his weathered face growing grimmer with each line. When he finishes, he looks up and meets your eyes. "Well," he says quietly, "this is it. The moment every warehouse dreads." He turns to the courier. "Rest your horses. Get some food. I'll spread the word." The courier nods and disappears toward whatever facilities the warehouse maintains for visitors. Old Jong turns to you, and for a moment he looks every one of his 70 years. "You should go," he says. "This won't be pretty. Auditors mean panic, mean long hours, mean everyone's nerves stretched to breaking. Not a good time for visitors. But you don't go. You can't. After everything you've seen, everything you've learned, you need to know how this story ends." Old Jong reads your expression and shrugs. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." He picks up a brass bell and begins ringing it with a rhythm that clearly means something. An alarm, a summons, a call to arms. Within minutes, workers begin arriving, drawn from their beds by the bell's urgent clanging. They come in ones and twos, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they take in old Jong's grim face and the absence of any obvious emergency. Magistrate Liu appears, looking unusually disheveled, his robes thrown on hastily. Senior scribe Wang follows, his brush already in his hand as if he'd been sleeping with it. Zhao the accountant arrives last, his abacus clutched to his chest like a talisman. Old Jong waits until a crowd has gathered, then holds up the courier's document. "Auditors," he says simply, and the word ripples through the crowd like wind through wheat. Faces pale. Voices murmur. Someone lets out a soft curse. Magistrate Liu steps forward, taking the document and reading it himself. When he looks up, his expression is carefully controlled, but you can see the tension in his jaw. 2 days, he says. Maybe less. We need to be ready. What follows is chaos, but it's chaos with a purpose. Zhao disappears into his office to begin recalculating every number he's produced in the past year. Wang gathers his assistant scribes and starts pulling records, organizing them for easy reference. Workers fan out through the warehouse, checking tags, moving bales, preparing for the scrutiny to come. And through it all runs a current of barely suppressed panic. The knowledge that auditors don't just check numbers, they find mistakes, and mistakes have consequences. You find yourself swept up in the activity, running errands, carrying messages, doing whatever small tasks present themselves. No one questions your presence now. You're just another pair of hands, another body to help with the immense task of preparing for inspection. You carry stacks of wooden slips from Wang's office to the inspection tables. You help workers shift bales so their tags can be read more easily. You even find yourself standing beside Zhao, reading numbers aloud while his fingers fly across his abacus. The hours blur together. Morning becomes afternoon, becomes evening, and still the work continues. Lamps are lit, then trimmed, then lit again as darkness falls. Meals are eaten standing up, snatched between tasks. Sleep is a distant memory, a luxury no one can afford. Through it all, you begin to understand what the auditors mean to people like these. They're not just inspectors, they're judges, executioners, the sharp edge of imperial authority. If they find discrepancies, people lose their positions. If they find evidence of corruption, people lose their heads. The warehouse has been run honestly for as long as anyone can remember, but honesty isn't enough. You also need accuracy, consistency, the kind of perfection that's almost impossible to achieve with 4,000 to 7,000 bolts of silk and decades of accumulated records. Late on the second day, word comes that the auditors have been sighted on the road, perhaps half a day's journey away. The pace of work intensifies, then reaches a plateau where nothing more can be done. The warehouse is as ready as it will ever be. The records are as complete as human effort can make them. Now all that's left is to wait. You find yourself standing with Magistrate Liu near the entrance, watching the road that leads east toward Chang'an. He looks older than he did when you first met him, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders more stooped. But his eyes are clear, and his voice is steady when he speaks. 40 years, he says quietly. 40 years I've been in this warehouse, and I've never failed an audit. Not once. But every time, I feel like this. Like I've forgotten something, like there's some mistake hiding in the records that's about to be discovered. He glances at you. Does that make sense? To be confident in your work but terrified of the inspection anyway. You nod, because it does make sense. The auditors represent something beyond mere accuracy. They represent the Emperor's gaze, the weight of the empire, the knowledge that everything you've done will be judged by standards you can't control. Even if your work is perfect, there's always the chance that the auditors will see it differently, will find fault where you found none, will impose consequences you can't predict. The afternoon wears on. Workers drift to the entrance, drawn by the same nervous anticipation. Wang appears, his hands stained with ink, his expression that of a man who's done everything possible and now must wait for the verdict. Zhao follows, his abacus still in his hands, his fingers moving restlessly across the beads even now. Old Zhong stands apart, his sword at his side, his eyes on the road. And then, at last, you see them, a cloud of dust on the horizon, resolving slowly into riders. A dozen of them, maybe more, moving at the steady pace of people who know they're expected and see no reason to hurry. The imperial auditors have arrived. Magistrate Liu straightens his robes and steps forward to meet them, his chin high, his expression calm. Whatever he's feeling inside, he doesn't show it. Behind him, the workers of the warehouse stand in silence, waiting to learn their fate. The auditors ride into the compound with the casual authority of people who know that everyone around them is afraid. There are 12 of them, led by a man so thin he seems composed entirely of angles. Sharp cheekbones, sharp elbows, a sharp gaze that misses nothing as it sweeps across the assembled workers. He dismounts without waiting for assistance, his robe settling around him in folds that somehow look accusatory even in stillness. Magistrate Liu steps forward and bows, formally, correctly, his back straight despite the years of lifting bales and climbing racks. "Welcome to the Chang'an No. 7 Silk Warehouse," he says. "We are honored by your inspection." The lead auditor, his name, you learn, is Inspector Gang, and he's famous throughout the empire for his thoroughness and his complete lack of humor, inclines his head a fraction of an inch. "The honor is mine," he says, in a tone that suggests it's anything but. "Shall we begin?" What follows is unlike anything you've experienced in your time at the warehouse. The auditors don't just check, they probe, they question, they demand explanations for things no one has thought to explain in years. They pull records at random and compare them to the bales they represent. They weigh silk and measure it and hold it up to the light, looking for discrepancies that would be invisible to anyone else. They interview workers individually, asking about procedures and practices and anything else that occurs to them. You watch from the edges, trying to stay out of the way. Senior scribe Wang sits with the lead auditor for hours, going through records so old the wooden slips have darkened with age. Each slip is examined, questioned, compared to others. Wang answers calmly, his voice never rising, his patience apparently infinite. But you can see the tension in his hands, the way they clench under the table when Inspector Geng lingers too long over a particular entry. Zhao faces his own interrogation in the accountant's office. The auditors have brought their own abacus, their own records, their own carefully compiled totals from other warehouses and other years. They compare Zhao's numbers to theirs, looking for inconsistencies, for the kind of errors that suggest carelessness or worse. Zhao's fingers never stop moving, even when he's not calculating, a nervous habit you hadn't noticed before, now suddenly visible. The workers continue their regular duties under the auditor's watchful eyes, every movement noted, every decision questioned. Why is that bale stored here rather than there? Why were these bolts moved last week? Who authorized that transfer? And where are the documents to prove it? The questions never stop, and each one requires an answer, and each answer leads to more questions. By the second day, the strain is visible on every face. Magistrate Liu, who seemed eternal when you first met him, now looks merely old, tired and worn, and desperately hoping that 40 years of honest work will be enough to satisfy these cold-eyed men from the capital. Lady Feng has retreated to her imperial section, emerging only when summoned, her usual composure cracked around the edges. Even old Zhong, who faced down rats and thieves and the long watches of the night without flinching, seems diminished, his confidence shaken by the relentless scrutiny. And then, on the third day, something happens. One of the auditors, a younger man with the eager expression of someone trying to prove himself, pulls a bale from a rack and unrolls it for inspection. The silk within is beautiful, fine, even, clearly high quality. But the tags tell a different story. According to the records, this bale contains medium-grade silk from an ordinary commandery. The discrepancy is obvious, undeniable, and suddenly the warehouse holds its breath. Inspector Gang is summoned. He examines the bale, the tags, the records. He questions the worker who stored it, the inspector who approved it, the scribe who recorded it. No one has answers. The bale shouldn't be here. The tag shouldn't match this silk. Somehow, somewhere, a mistake was made, or something worse. You watch as Magistrate Liu is called before the lead auditor. His face is pale, but his voice is steady as he explains, as he offers possibilities, as he tries to account for the unaccountable. Inspector Gang listens without expression, then asks a single question: was this an error, or was it intentional? It's the question everyone has been dreading, the one that separates a reprimand from an execution. Magistrate Liu hesitates, and in that hesitation you see the weight of 40 years, the accumulated burden of every decision he's ever made in this warehouse. Then he speaks. "It was an error," he says. "My error. I should have caught it. I didn't. The responsibility is mine." For a long moment, no one moves. Then Inspector Gang nods slowly. "I believe you," he says. "But belief isn't proof. We'll need to investigate further." He turns away, and Magistrate Liu stands alone, the possibility of his downfall hanging in the air like smoke. The investigation continues. Records are checked and rechecked. Workers are questioned again, their memories probed for any detail that might explain the discrepancy. And slowly, painfully, the truth emerges. The bale was mislabeled years ago, when a junior scribe made an error in transcription. The error was never caught because the bale was never moved, never re-inspected, never subjected to the kind of scrutiny that would have revealed the mistake. It sat in its rack for years, accumulating dust and mystery, until an overeager auditor pulled it down and changed everything. It's not corruption. It's not theft. It's just a mistake, the kind of mistake that happens when humans try to maintain perfect records over decades and decades. But in the world of imperial audits, mistakes have consequences. The auditors spend another day reviewing their findings, consulting among themselves, preparing their report. The warehouse workers go about their duties in a daze, unable to concentrate, unable to think of anything but the verdict to come. You wander the aisles one last time, saying silent goodbyes to the bales you've come to know, to the sections that have become familiar, to the people who have shared their world with you. On the final day, Inspector Gang summons everyone to the entrance. The workers gather, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. Magistrate Liu stands at the front, his posture that of a man awaiting sentence. Wang and Zhao flank him, their expressions grim. Old Zhong is there too, leaning on his sword, looking older than you've ever seen him. Inspector Gang unrolls a document and reads from it in a flat, emotionless voice. He lists the findings. The warehouse is well run, the records are generally accurate, the staff is competent and honest. He notes the discrepancy with the mislabeled bale, attributing it to human error rather than malfeasance. He recommends a reprimand for the supervisor on duty at the time, long retired now, beyond the reach of punishment, and additional training for current staff to prevent similar errors in the future. And then he rolls up the document and says the words everyone has been waiting for: the audit is concluded. No further action is required. For a moment, no one moves. Then, slowly, the tension breaks. Workers embrace each other, their relief palpable. Wang sits down abruptly, his legs apparently giving out. Zhao laughs, actually laughs, a sound you haven't heard from him before. Magistrate Liu closes his eyes and bows his head, whether in thanks or exhaustion you can't tell. The auditors mount their horses and ride away, leaving the warehouse to return to its normal rhythms. But nothing will ever be quite the same. The mislabeled bale will be corrected, its tags replaced, its location noted in the records. The staff will attend training sessions, reviewing procedures they've followed for years. And everyone will carry the memory of these days, the knowledge of how close they came to disaster. You find Magistrate Liu standing alone near the entrance, watching the dust settle on the road to Chang'an. He doesn't turn as you approach, but he speaks quietly, his voice rough with emotion. 40 years, he says. 40 years, and it came down to a single mistake. A scribe who wrote the wrong character, years ago, probably long dead now. And if the auditors had decided differently, everything I've worked for would have been for nothing. He shakes his head slowly. I don't know whether to be grateful or terrified. You stand with him in silence, watching the road. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shade of orange and gold. The warehouse looms behind you, full of silk, full of stories, full of the accumulated labor of thousands of people you'll never meet. And somewhere in its depths, a bale has new tags, a scribe has a new entry in his records, and the empire continues its endless work of counting and cataloging and preserving. Magistrate Liu turns to you at last, and for the first time since you met him, he smiles, a real smile, warm and tired and somehow grateful. You should go, he says. The night's coming, and you've seen enough for one visit. But before you do, he reaches into his robe and withdraws something small, wrapped in a scrap of silk. He presses it into your hands. A reminder of what you've seen here, of what we do. You unwrap it carefully. Inside is a wooden tag, old and worn, its characters faded but still legible. It's from the mislabeled bale, you realize, the one that nearly brought the warehouse down. He's giving it to you, a piece of the story, a token of the night everything almost went wrong. You thank him, not sure what else to say. He nods and turns away, walking back into the warehouse, back to his duties, back to the silk that will never stop coming and the records that will never quite be perfect. You stand alone at the entrance, holding the tag, watching the last light fade from the sky. Behind you, the warehouse settles into its nighttime rhythm, old Zhong taking his post, the silk resting in the darkness. Ahead of you, the road leads wherever you want to go. You take a last look at the silent bales, the dim aisles, the place where you've learned so much about the empire and its treasures. Then you step forward, into the twilight, the inventory complete but the story lingering in the dust, and in the small wooden tag you carry with you, a reminder of the night you spent among the silk. And now, as the last images of that Han Dynasty warehouse fade like lamplight at dawn, let yourself drift. The silk is safe, the records are closed, and the night guard has settled into his watch. You've walked the aisles, touched the bales, learned the secret language of tags and seals and woven characters. You've seen the empire at its most meticulous, its most vulnerable, its most human. And now it's time to let it all go, to release the stories and the scents and the sounds, to let them settle into the quiet places of your mind where they can rest until morning. The warehouse will still be there when you return to it in memory. The cedar scent, the rustle of silk, the click of the accountant's abacus. But for now, there's only the slow drift of consciousness, the gentle pull of sleep, the knowledge that somewhere, in some distant time, the work continues without you. The scribes are writing. The inspectors are checking. The silk is waiting. So close your eyes now. Let the darkness wrap around you like the finest shoe silk, soft and warm and infinitely comforting. There are no more audits to fear, no more mysteries to solve, no more stories to chase. There's only the quiet rhythm of your breathing, the slow fade of awareness, the peace that comes at the end of a long journey. Sleep well, traveler. The warehouse will keep its vigil without you.